We're going to get started. So section 2 is working with sellers, and specifically the main focus is going to be on residential. Commercial could be a little bit different. I do have a little section set aside for property management. Property management, we're not working with buyers and sellers. We're working with tenants and landlords. So we do have that little section set aside. We'll see that next weekend as well. Before we talk about specifically about sellers, which again is where we're going to spend most of our day today, when you're entering just general requirements for agency contracts. So commission rule and law, remember 93A is law, 58A is rule. So law and rules say prior to entering into an agency agreement, always ask if you're already in an agency agreement. When you meet somebody for the first time, buyer or seller, that should be one of the first questions that fall out of your mouth. Are you working with an agent? We're not being nosy. We're not being rude. We want to be respectful of that existing relationship. We are all good with that. Our National Association of Realtor Code of Ethics prohibits us from taking somebody else's client. So I can't call, if I'm looking through MLS and I see a listing, I can't call that owner and say, boy, Chastity just not doing a good job for you, Mr. and Mrs. Seller. If you fire her and hire me, I could do much better. I can't do that. That's good news, right? Same thing when we're working with buyers. So when the buyers come into your open house, hey guys, how's it going? They want to strike up a conversation. It's okay to ask them if they're working with an agent. One trick that I do, if y'all want free advice for the day, when I send my buyers open housing, I send them with a stack of my business cards, because after the open house, I want the agent to follow up with me, not with them. So then that way, when they say, are you working with an agent? Not only can my buyers say yes, but they can say, here's my agent. Thoughts on that? Thumbs up.
Okay, can you say it again? When you send your buyers open housing, I didn't quite process.
When I send them to open houses, when I tell them to go to open houses.
Oh, when you send them to open house. Okay.
Yep. I send them open housing. Okay. Also, you may want to coach your buyers too, right? Let them know you're going to be asked. It's okay to tell them I'm your agent. And like I said, take it a step further. I can always tell when buyers come in that have agents and have good agents, because hey guys, how are you doing today? And we have an agent. I'm like, yes, you do. You have a good one, because they put a little bit of fear in you apparently. So same thing with sellers. If you get the call and you pull up the listing in MLS and you notice that it's active, they already have an existing agreement, right? So that should be a quick question. Let's see, static, you may want to, and if you need to restart. So that should be a quick, fast question you ask. If the answer is yes, then we need not proceed until that agency agreement is over or it's expired. Now, remember, I cannot solicit. We'll talk in just a second about what happens if they reach out to me. There's the difference. Who calls whom first, right? So I cannot solicit.
Julia, now I know that it's possible to have oral agency, even though it needs to be reduced to writing before the offer. If this person, you ask them, you work with an agent and they don't have a written agency, they say, yeah. Is that the same thing, or are we talking about written agency agreement?
Oral is not exclusive.
Okay.
So the buyer can date as many firms as they want. Okay. So they may say, I have an oral agency agreement. Can I talk to them? Yes, because it's non-exclusive. When I think of exclusivity, when you're dating somebody exclusive, how many people should you be dating?
Just one.
You should just be dating one. Good answer. So, so the buyers and sellers, the exclusivity is a one-way street, right? The buyer and seller can only date one firm in a written agreement. So if it's oral, they're free to date as many firms as they want. And there are buyers out there that will call 3 or 4 agents and say, this is what I'm looking for. The first one that finds it wins, you know, so they kind of have that competitive nature. Any of our agency agreements with our property owners have to be on the in writing from the beginning. I cannot perform a single service for a seller or the owner of a property in a property management situation. I cannot perform a single service for an owner, may that be for sale or for rent, without first having our agency agreement in writing. Again, we'll talk more specifically about sellers in just a second. Agency agreements with buyers and tenants, as we said, can be oral at first. It's not exclusive, but they have to be in writing no later than the time that we're ready to present an offer on their behalf. I cannot present an offer with an oral agreement. If you want me to present an offer on your behalf, I have to have it in writing. The Real Estate Commission suggests, well, first off, let me say this. You can get it in writing as early as you want. Okay, this is the latest that you have to get it in writing. The Real Estate Commission suggests that we try to get it in writing before we write the offer, because the concern that the commission has for us, what if we spend up all this time writing the offer, doing the research, filling in the blanks, and then the buyer says, nah, I'm not signing that. So the rule says presenting an offer. The commission suggests writing an offer. Everybody says you can get it in writing as early as you want. There are some firms, there are some agents that will not practice oral buyer agency. That's their policy. Remember, I think kind of the big rule of thumb here, what you do for one, you do for all. So if you set that as your policy that you're not going to do oral buyer agency, then you need to treat everybody the same and not do oral buyer agency. Again, we're going to spend more time on buyers in the next section. All of our agency agreements have to be signed by the parties. Now, remember we said the agency agreement is between the client and who? The client and
the firm.
The firm. I'm allowed to sign the agency agreement on behalf of my firm. That's one thing that I can do. So the firm will allow me to sign on their behalf. My license number is required. Y'all, anytime you're signing your name, you're going to need your license number. So go ahead and memorize that. Maybe coming to post licensing helps because it's got you typing it in a few times. But go ahead and memorize that license number because you need it for everything that you do. All of our agency agreements need a definite end date. And when they're over, they're over. The kind of sort of exception to this is when we talk about our property management agreements. Our property management agreements still have a definite end date, but they can allow for an automatic renewal. Do they have to allow for an automatic renewal? No, but they can if the parties agree, but they still have a definite end date. Again, we got a little section on property management we'll see next weekend. And then all of our agency agreements have the non-discrimination clause. I will see that today when we look at our listing agreement. So that's kind of the big picture of agency agreements. So let's spend some time now again, specifically just about sellers. And one type of relationship that I think is gaining popularity that we're starting to see more and more of, and we need to have an understanding of this type of firm. But there are real estate firms that are known as limited service listing contract, limited service firms. First off, never refer to these companies as discount brokers. That could be a possible violation of antitrust laws. They're a real estate firm just like everybody else. So be careful when you refer, you limited service listing. And with a limited service listing, they're usually not paid a percentage of the sales price. They're a lot of times paid in a la carte. So I'll put your listing in MLS for X amount. I'll hold an open house for X amount. I will, what else? Put my combo box on your house for X amount. it's a limited service. NCAR doesn't have an agency agreement for a limited service firm. So limited service companies for their agency agreement, because commission's different, services are different. Guys, please make sure we understand. Limited service companies are limiting their services. They're not limiting their duties. When a seller enters into an agency agreement with a limited service firm, that firm still owes them OCAR. It is still an agency agreement. Again, the only thing limited are the services that they provide. So they are still owed, those sellers are still owed OCAR. The brokers, the firm, they cannot waive their duties to discover and disclose material facts. Is anybody ever allowed to waive their duty to discover and disclose material facts? No. We always have a reason to disclose material facts, and that includes a limited service. They still can't, they got to avoid making false promises. They got to avoid any undisclosed conflict of interest. They still have to properly account for trust funds. This is that list that we saw yesterday. Again, their services are limited, not their duties. Limited service firms go on things that they can't do. They still have to act competently. They still have a duty to deliver all offers. Are we guys getting it? They still have the same rules that everybody else does. They got to comply with the Residential Property Disclosure Act that we will talk about in just a second. They also have to comply with the Lead-Based Paint Act that we will talk about in just a second.
So that's still a listing agreement, I guess?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Again, I don't have a pre-printed form for that. So the firm would have to have an attorney draft up a form for them to use when working with sellers. How commission is split, again, it's an agreement, the firm policy and an agreement between the seller and the buyer. You guys remember me telling you yesterday about that listing that was offering me 0.5% commission? That was a limited service firm. That was a limited service company. I'd have no idea how much the listing agent got. But again, it's a la carte. I did another one of these. It was probably the smoothest transaction I ever received. When we got to settlement, I saw the closing disclosure. The listing firm got like $400. I got what my firm considered their full amount. So it's all an agreement. And I'll be honest with you guys, when I first saw it was a limited service, I was like, oh dear, here we go. I never did have communication with the listing agent. To this day, I still have never talked to the listing agent. All of my communication was with the seller. And when I first saw that, I'm not going to lie, I was a little nervous. But as it turns out, the seller was an investor and he did this on a regular basis. So he was knowledgeable. He pretty much just needed somebody to put it in MLS for him. And that's what he hired the limited service firm to do, that $400. Yeah, I was on the buyer side. I represented the buyer. So they still paid me, again, what my firm considered a full commission. That's what they advertised in MLS. But when I got to settlement, I saw that the listing firm got $400. So that's what they charged to put that listing. You know what I'm saying? It seems like, but they didn't do everything. I never did communicate. They didn't negotiate. They didn't even do the open house. That was a buyer I sent open housing. And she said, I think the seller was there. And I said, yep, that probably sounds right.
So Julie, did you ask your buyer to pay the other part of the commission? Or did you just settle for
no,
the
because 3% was what my firm expected to collect.
Okay. So, but in the listing, was it a 0.5%?
This one was. This is two different. So this one was 0.5. Another one was 3%. Yep.
I was just wondering if you were only getting paid 0.5 or did you ask your
buyer? And no, because this one I called my buyers and said, this isn't going to cut it. So if you move forward, you're going to have to ante up some money.
So it's okay to ask your buyer to pay the other difference.
That's what our buyer's agency agreement says.
Okay, cool.
Do you see
Absolutely.
this? Do you see this becoming more common with the electronic world we live in? Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep, I see it gaining. I see more and more of it. You know, if you never have sold a house before, I would hope you would search around and see, you know, which one is best for you. I think there's challenges with selling, but again, you know, in this case, sometimes investors that do this 6-12 times a year, you know, they have a little bit more experience. They have a little bit more knowledge on how it works. So ultimately it's up to the seller, right? Who they're comfortable with, the services that they're comfortable with. The limited service company should be upfront about the fact that, look, if you hire us, you know, we're not going to do this unless you pay for it. Like I said, it's all a la carte, whatever services they provide.
Julie, what happens if the buyer doesn't want to meet the 3% that you needed to meet? Like, would you still, like, what happens then? You just come out and like, hey, I have a contract with you. You need to meet
They
my.
entered into, if they have a written agency agreement with me, then we have a contractual agreement that they're going to pay me that. So if they say, no, I'm not going to do it, then I'm saying, I'm not going to show you this house. Right. I mean, because we have an agreement. If you buy a house, I get paid. There's something out there also called a protection agreement. The protection agreement is protecting our commission. Let's say you have a buyer that is interested in a for sale by owner. The for sale by owner is unrepresented. Yes, they don't have an agent. They chose to go it alone. Your buyer's interested in the FSBO. Again, you guys, our buyer's agency agreement says, I will always ask the seller to pay my commission first. So you owe that to your buyer. When they're interested in a for sale by owner and you call that FSBO to make that appointment, you got to ask the FSBO, are you going to pay my commission? Or are you going to cooperate? However you want to word that. If the for sale by owner says, yeah, I'm going to pay you, are you going to take them at their verbal word? Everybody, please shake your head no. Guys, trust me, the only one protecting your commission is you. So when that for sale by owner says, yeah, I'll pay you, say, great. When we come this afternoon, I got a form for you to sign. So you can get that in writing. We will look at the form briefly in just a second. When you first meet this for sale by owner, may it be on the phone or when you show up for the showing appointment with your buyers, in addition to the form that protects your commission, what other form do I need to go over with the for sale by owner? What else do I need to discuss with the for sale by owner?
Working with real estate.
That's it. Because doesn't the FSBO deserve to know that I represent the client? Doesn't the FSBO deserve to know that whatever you tell me, I have a duty to tell my buyer? So even if the FSBO says, no, I'm not going to pay you, we still need to do our working with real estate agents disclosure with the FSBO. The form that protects our commission is called an unrepresented seller disclosure and fee agreement standard. And again, we'll look at this form when we come back from break. Protection agreement protects you, protects your commission. Now I have a written agreement between the FSBO and the firm saying, if you bring me this buyer closes, I owe you commission. Some FSBOs are willing to cooperate with buyer's agents, some aren't. Sometimes they're advertising their listings, you know, on forsalebyowner.com or wherever they're advertising. Always ask, always ask. Anybody had the opportunity yet to work with a FSBO as a buyer's agent? Donna has, both Plummer has too.
Yeah, the seller wouldn't pay the commission, so my buyers paid it.
So your buyers had to pay. Yeah. I mean, that's the best thing I can do for my buyers. Ask, you know, will you pay? If they say no, okay, that's their right.
But
there's no obligation that they have
I
to.
ended up doing the seller's portion pretty much too. So, I mean, you know. just to make the
You
deal
did it for
work.
your buyers, though.
I
You did it to
did,
get
I
your
did.
buyers to because who's your client, right? You had to get your client to the finish line. So, and I hear you, Donna, and
And
some
it was-
firms, some firms may have a higher commission charge if the buyer goes for sale by owner. You just got to spell it out in your buyer's agency agreement. You just got to spell it out. So again, check with your firm policy on that. I did one once, and the young lady was currently in pre-licensing, and she thought she knew it all, and she was going to play real estate, and she was going to do it with her mother-in-law's townhouse. It was good times. Good times. We got through it. I mean, even her husband, y'all, her husband's the one that told me that. She's playing real estate. All right. We mentioned yesterday, we talked about our multiple listing services a little bit. So here they are again, multiple listing services, also known as our MLS. This is a centralized place for all members of the MLS to share their listings and compensation. So for example, here we have the Triad MLS, and the Triad MLS, the members of the Triad MLS are comprised of the Winston-Salem Board of Realtors, the Greensboro Board of Realtors, the High Point Board of Realtors. I think Lexington is with us now, Lexington Board of Realtors. I want to say Ashboro. Triad MLS is huge. So once you join your local Board of Realtors, then you get into the Triad MLS. And when you put your listing in the Triad MLS and say, hey, everybody, I have a listing, bring me a buyer. By the way, if you bring me a buyer, this is how much I'm willing to pay you. This is how much I'm going to compensate you and your firm for bringing me this buyer. Remember what we said yesterday, though. This agreement for compensation only applies to members of your MLS. So if you're going outside of your MLS, if we're going to go to Raleigh and show one of Kiana's listings, we need to call Kiana first and say, hey, are you willing to pay us? Because that agreement to pay is only for members of your MLS. So y'all just make a mental note of that. If you're ever going outside, if you're going to Charlotte or the mountains or whatever, the beach, when you're leaving your MLS, before you drive the whole way to Raleigh to show that, have that showing, make sure you communicate with the listing agent.
That was a big revelation for me yesterday because I live in Burlington. I'm smack in the middle of,
You're on the blended
Triad and
area,
Triangle.
Yeah.
So I'm Triad and Alamance, but I don't have Triangle.
You don't have
But
Triangle.
I have friends in Triangle, and I'll ask them, they'll pull it, but it never occurred to me to, so
Yeah.
that was a
even
big
like
reveal.
Plumber, for example, your E-key on your phone only works for Triad MLS.
Right.
So the listing agent in Raleigh may need to come let you in because your
Right.
E-key doesn't work for that because that's a different. So as long as you're within your MLS, you're okay. And it's interesting that I know that blended no man's zone that you're talking about there. Is your firm a member of both Triad and Triangle?
Yes.
So at some point in your career, that may be something. If you see yourself starting to do lots of work in Raleigh, that just may be something for you to think about is being dually affiliated. If you're going to do one a year, but if you start doing 5 or 10, then that might be something for you to consider. All the listings that go into MLS, the listing agent is the one that's responsible for the accuracy. Again, we mentioned this yesterday. Maybe you have an administrator. Maybe you have somebody working for you 10 hours a week. Maybe your firm has an admin that enters your listings. If your name is on it, you're responsible for the accuracy of it. So if somebody else is entering your listings, I sure hope you review it before it goes public. Guys, we know how the internet works, right? Once you hit submit, it's out there. And it's really hard to get back. Yeah, Donna, man, Triad MLS got tough this year, didn't they? I mean, they gave us till like January 3rd, and now we have different categories of fines. There's category 1, category 2. If you're not familiar what's going on with Triad MLS, make sure you get your training. Even if you put your own listing in, does it hurt to have somebody look at it before you hit submit? They may not be able to verify the information, but just help from an outsider's eye to make sure that it looks okay. Make sure they don't have anything that sticks out to them. So always check it for accuracy. Guys, we're all humans. We all make mistakes. But if you can have somebody proof it before you put it out, you got a better chance of having it go out right the first time. You guys ever see listings in MLS? They go out at one price and then minutes later, the price increases. Somebody put that price in wrong and the seller called and said, that's not the price we agreed to, you know? So within minutes, they're already changing the price. Anytime you make a change in MLS, once it's active, it stays in the history. So they can always track it down. Also, as we said yesterday, disclaimers do not protect the listing agent. So you can't put something in there like buyer's agent to verify and say, all right, I'm done. I'm not going to get in trouble. Disclaimers do not protect you. I'm not saying you can't put them in there. I'm just saying no, that they can't protect you. They're not going to protect you if you make a mistake. Questions on MLS? When you're working with sellers, we need to be aware of antitrust laws. First off, I think it's important to understand that the whole point of antitrust laws is to prohibit monopolies. No company should have all the rights to one piece of the market. Real estate is a market, and market should allow for open and free trade. And there is no company that can, you know, rule the market. This isn't Spectrum here that we're talking about, right? Were we not all happy to start seeing other cable? I mean, we got North State here in my area. I hope you guys are starting to see some other internet TV providers. Not to pick on Spectrum, but they sure had a monopoly for the longest time, didn't they? And now they got some competition in the market. One thing about price fixing, and I think we talked about this one yesterday, and I think this is the one that continues to get us in trouble. Antitrust laws say that there is no collaboration between two or more firms to set brokerage fees. Local board of realtors do not tell us how much to charge. NAR, NCREC, NCAR, they cannot tell us how much commission to charge. However much commission you charge, whatever your brokerage fees are, that's compensation, referral fees, bonuses, all that is up to the firm's policy. You guys need to be very, very careful. When you're sitting at that listing appointment, the seller at some point will look at you and say, how much do you charge? You need to be very careful about how you respond to that. Do not say all of us in the Triad MLS charge X amount. You just engaged in an antitrust law violation. When the seller wants to know how much you charge, your answer is, my firm charges X amount. Is your commission negotiable? Do you have wiggle room? Because once the seller asks you what they charge, the next breath, they're going to say, will you reduce that? And how you respond to that is up to your firm's policy. How negotiable is it? How much wiggle room do you have? That's up to your firm's policy. The other thing that I see all the time on these private group Facebook pages that we talked about yesterday, y'all be careful before you post on these. The other thing I see on the regular is group boycotting. Group boycotting is two or more brokers, two or more firms working to push somebody out of the market. Maybe you have a bad experience with another agent. Guys, we all have bad days. Can we agree with that? Does everybody have a bad day every once in a while? Yeah, it happens, right? Just because you have a bad day with an agent doesn't mean they're bad people. Just because you have a bad day with a bad inspector doesn't mean he's a bad inspector. Maybe you give him a second chance, maybe you don't. What you can't do is get on one of those private Facebook group pages and say, nobody used this home inspector, right? We can't collaborate together to push this home inspector out. The most recent one I saw blows my mind. I don't know if you guys saw the March bulletin. I'm sorry, the April e-bulletin, and there was a company that got disciplined. I'll let you look at it if you want to know more. But agents were all over private Facebook going, ha, 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 they got in trouble. Ha, 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 they got popped. And I'm like, y'all need to be careful because one day we may be going, ha, 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 they got in trouble to ourselves. Questions or comments on this? I think one of the biggest ones that we offend, there's a website out there that rhymes with Willow that is now a real estate company. So we need to be careful. They have a license now, I'm just going to say. Agree with it or not. Be careful. Y'all promise me that. Social media can hurt. Again, working with sellers, how we can solicit listings. As we mentioned earlier, National Association of Realtors prohibits us from soliciting an active listing. As I said, I can't go through the MLS. I'm not going to call Chastity's seller. I guess I get to pick on you today, Chastity. You're the one I saw first. I can't call Chastity's seller and say, gosh, in this market, you've been listed for 2 months. She's not doing a good job for you. Why don't you fire her and hire me? I hope you have a little bit more tact than that, but you guys get the idea, right? I cannot solicit. Once you see it active in MLS, now, what if Chastity's listing expires today and I wake up tomorrow and it says expired? Can I go after it? Yeah, their relationship is over, right? There are agents, that's part of their marketing. They look at expireds and sometimes withdrawn, so they can send letters out once a week or once a day, whatever. Once they're expired, be careful about withdrawn, you guys, because sometimes they're withdrawn for personal, maybe like illness or something, right? It might not just be withdrawn because they're not happy with their agent. They may have a legit reason, so just be careful. So what if we do it anyway? What if we solicit Chastity's listing anyway? That could get us involved in a court case around tortious interference. And what tortious interference is when you wrongfully intervene with somebody's business relationship, somebody's client. Again, this wouldn't come down from the real estate commission. This would be a court case. So while I can't reach out to them, what if Chastity's seller reaches out to me? What if Chastity's seller's not happy and they call me and say, our listing agreement expires, pick a date, let's say tax day, April 15th. Our listing agreement expires on April 15th. Can you list our property? If they reach out to me, first off, I want you to document that. I want you to document that they reached out to you first. First off, we need to encourage the seller to talk to Chastity's broker. We need to say, I'm so sorry you're not happy with your listing agent. Have you discussed it? Because the relationship is not with Chastity, is it? It's with the firm. And the broker in charge needs to know that the sellers are unhappy. Maybe the BIC will let them ride out. Maybe the BIC will let them terminate. Maybe the BIC will find another agent. Get Chastity a referral fee. But maybe there's a clash of personalities.
Julie, can you give me the definition for that again? Tortious interference.
It's just interference with a contractual relationship, interfering with a contractual relationship. If the sellers say, yeah, I've talked to Chastity's BIC and I'm not happy with them. I'm not happy with her. I just want it. Okay. Now I can have a conversation with them, but my conversation talks about what happens after that listing expires. I can talk to him about what I can do after it expires. What am I going to do on April 16th? comments on this? I mean, put yourself in Chastity's shoes, and I'm sorry, I keep picking on you. But if you were the listing agent and I had this happen once. My sellers called me. They were with another agent in my firm and they weren't satisfied. And so they went to the BIC and the BIC said, can we reassign you? And they said, all right, we'll give it one more shot. And they got me, and not to toot my horn, but they loved me. These people still send me a Christmas card, right? I mean, in this case, the BIC helped them out. I can't say all my sellers had that same experience, but these guys, definitely. We withdrew the agent's listing and then I put it in as active. So the agent looking at withdrawn called them not knowing that it was active. So make sure, active again, I should say. So make sure before you go after expired or withdrawn that it's not relisted with somebody else, right? Make sure that it is expired or withdrawn. And I don't mind that they call, because my sellers are like, oh yeah, we did withdraw, but we have another agent now, we're good. The thing that got me was they kept on. At that point, they should have said, oh my gosh, good for you, congratulations, best of luck, have a nice day, right? But they kept on. They wanted to know why they withdrew. Well, that's really none of your business. They wanted to know how long our relationship was. Definitely none of your business. My sellers called me, I was livid. It's like, I need a name now. And I called my BIC. I'm like, this is not. And he agreed with me. You guys with me? So if you do call somebody or send somebody a letter and they say, we've relisted with somebody, awesome, good for you, have a great day, end it, acknowledge it and end it. My BIC called her BIC and they hashed it out. She said she'd never do it again, I think I was supposed to be satisfied with that. I think you can tell by my tone that it still ticks me off a little bit. How we solicit, one thing when we're soliciting business, we need to comply with the do not call registries. These are regulated by FCC, Federal Communications Commissions. If you're going to go cold call, if you're going to do cold call to solicit business, you need to get your hands on this do not call registry. And you need to, before you dial the number, you need to see that they are or not on the do not call. If they're on the do not call, they've already said they don't want you to call. Maybe you purchase the list, maybe your firm purchase it, maybe you guys go in on it together. I have no idea what the cost is. The FCC says that we update it, we check it once every 31 days. And the commission suggests that we have an internal list, because even if you're calling somebody that's not on the do not call, so you look it up, you don't see them on the do not call and you call them and they say, please stop calling me, we have to honor that request. So the commission suggests that we have an internal list, hey guys, 123 Main Street told us not to call anymore. We have to honor their requests. If you're a buyer's agent and your buyer's interested in a FSBO, as a buyer's agent, you can contact the FSBO, even if they're on the do not call, because you have an interested buyer. They've advertised their property for sale. You cannot call the FSBO to solicit their listing if they're on the do not call. You guys see the difference? I have an agent that's interested. FSBO is on the do not call. I can call them. They invited me to when they advertise their property for sale. We need to have an interested buyer. This is not your BFF helping you out to get you through the front door of the house. This needs to be a legitimately interested buyer. I would even, some FSBOs may even request to see their pre-approval or pre-qualification letter just to know that they're a serious buyer. So it's the only time we can call a FSBO that's on the do not call. There are a couple other exceptions to the do not call. If you have permission to call, maybe for whatever reason you meet somebody, they're on the do not call, but they give you permission. If you've had a previous business relationship, let's say you had a listing agreement that expired, you can contact that former seller, even if they're on the do not call, for up to 18 months. So if your listing agreement expires yesterday, they're on the do not call, you can call them for up to 18 months or until they tell you to stop. A consumer inquiry. Maybe somebody fills out your website. Maybe somebody does an inquiry on your website. Maybe somebody comes to your open house and puts their phone number on your open house registry. If those people are on the do not call, we can call them for up to 3 months or until they tell us to stop calling. And then
Can
if
I
you have a
ask you-
personal
I'm sorry.
relationship, yes, of course.
I don't know if you know this, but how long does your phone number stay on the do not call list?
That's a great question. Anybody know? Obviously, spam people and robo people don't apply to the do not call list today, right? I got like 6 spam calls the other day. I'm like, I'm on the do not call. So I don't know why this only affects us and nobody else in the world, but you know, y'all getting bombarded with those. Mine come and go in waves. I go through periods where I don't hear anything. And then, like I said, I get 6 in a day. Always, always, always honor the consumer's request. When they say, Julie, stop calling me, we always honor their request. Take them off your list. So, gee, Julie, what's the big deal? It's just a phone call. Well, you could be looking at federal fines of up to $11,000 per call. You could be looking at state fines. State fines start $500 the first violation, $1,000 the second violation, and $5,000 or more for third. So is it worth picking up the phone? I mean, we're going to talk about maybe some other ways you can market yourself. I think cold calling is going away the past. Does anybody cold call? No. If you do cold call, get your hands on the do not call registry, but have a script in front of you too, and practice your script. Kind of like you're working with real estate agent disclosure, right? Practice it before you call. Another way that we can solicit listing is called, references the Canned Spam Act. This refers to our bulk emails. So we can send a mass email out. Maybe you're advertising your new listing. Maybe you want to promote your services. You can send a mass email out. The FCC says you have to have an opt-out option. So you guys get junk email and you have the unsubscribe button at the bottom. You got to provide that option to opt out. And if they click on reply and say, please stop emailing me, then you have to honor their request. You need to go in and actually update your list. The other way we might be able to solicit business is through faxes, junk faxes. Fax is coming back. Anybody in the medical profession on this call? No, fax is coming back. A lot of people, especially in the medical field, feel that the fax is a lot more secure than our emails. So I don't know if and when we'll see it again in real estate, but the fax is still around. Again, this applies to sending bulk faxes, junk faxes, or solicitation faxes. Again, you just have to have an option for them to opt out. So they either call this number or reply to this fax. They can send a fax back saying, please stop sending me faxes, and we just have to honor it. So we've rattled off a whole lot of things that you can't do. You can't call chastity's active sellers. You can't call them if they're on the do not call. You can't send them an email after they've opted out, send them a fax after they've opted out. What do you guys think are some other ways that we can solicit? What are other ways that we can try to solicit some business?
Door to door.
Door to door. And that's how
Facebook.
the stock market was formed, right? And they just started going door to door. Now we got the stock market. What else did I hear?
Facebook or
Social media, absolutely. Yep, promote yourself on social media. What other things can I do to solicit myself?
send out
Solicit
postcards.
postcards, mailings, snail mail, right? They can do that. So, you can be creative, get a billboard, put your ad on a shopping cart. Have you guys seen that? I love that. I went to the grocery store and I pulled the cart out. I was like, oh, I know her, so it was a pretty exciting moment for me. I hope she had buyers and sellers say the same thing. So, as long as you are following the solicitation laws of the phone, the email, the fax, and NAR's code of ethics, again, just be respectful. If you go door to door, may I suggest you take a friend or a partner with you? There's safety in numbers. Not everybody's going to be thrilled to see you knocking on their door. So be prepared for, I never went door to door because quite frankly, when somebody knocks on my front door, I cannot stand it. That's just me. Some agents have had great success going door to door. So the only thing I have to say to you is if door to door is the way you want to go, please take somebody with you because there is absolutely safety in numbers. And if you pull into a neighborhood that has a sign on it that says no solicitation, are you invited to walk on the doors of the people of those neighborhoods? No, because they've already told you this neighborhood. You guys with me? So you still got to pay attention when you pull into the neighborhood. Questions or comments? Soliciting business.
Also on that, look for no trespassing signs.
Yes, good point. Good point. No soliciting, no trespassing. You're not the exception. Thank you, John. Okay. All right. Well, it's time for our first break. So let's take 10. We come back, we keep working with sellers. Welcome back. You guys still trying to do yard work on your on your breaks? Run out there? Did you get it all done yesterday? I think John and Donna both were running out there on their breaks trying to do.
Yeah, April helped me out yesterday. She got it done.
All right. So the form that we mentioned earlier, our unrepresented seller disclosure and fee agreement. This is the protection agreement that we were talking about. So when you're working with a for sale by owner, and they agree to pay you. If they don't pay you, you don't need this form. But for sale by owner, they agree to pay you. And this form just says that the selling agent is representing the buyer. Remember, the selling agent is the one that works with the buyer. Seller is the owner of the property known as 123 Main Street. Seller is endeavoring to sell property without assistance of a licensed real estate agent. However, the firm has a client who's your buyer's name that would like to see the property. So the firm recognizes, the firm identifies that the seller is going without the assistance of an unlicensed real estate agent. If seller sells a property to the client, the seller agrees to pay the firm a fee of X amount. So whatever the firm's policy is, again, some firms have a policy with a different compensation for sale by owners. As Donna indicated, sometimes we feel like we do more work. So some firms might have a different tier, if you will. Again, just check with your firm's policy. Here's our non-discriminatory clause verbiage. We'll see that again when we look at our agency agreements. Firm will be deemed earned. Can we even see that? Here, let's make it a little bit bigger. Firm will be deemed earned if seller enters into a contract to sell the property to the firm's client at any time within X amount of days from signing this agreement. So this isn't going to go on forever, right? I show you my firm and I specify who this buyer is. So this isn't just anybody I show up. This is a different agreement for each buyer. You guys with me? If you have 3 buyers and you're going to have 3 of these, maybe you can put it all together, check with your firm. But let's say if I show the property, if my buyer moves forward within 14 days, then that's the whatever we agree to here. Again, go back to firm policy. Seller acknowledges that firm is representing the client with respond to this property. Firm is representing the client who is up here identified as the buyer. So we've identified who this person is. And again, it's so important that we do our working with real estate agents. And as a matter of fact, they have a big warning here. Do not sign this form until you have received and read the working with real estate agent disclosure. And then we have a place for seller and firm to sign. Again, this protects your commission for the for sale by owner when you're working with the buyer. Questions on this one? And all that, all our forms and Learn Test Pass are under forms. So you can find them if you scroll through here. Let's talk about preparing. Let's get ready to meet this seller. So there's something called a pre-listing. Listing agents, it's interesting. Our work is done up front. We do a lot of our work and our research before the consumer ever sees it on Zillow or Realtor.com or whatever website they're going to. So part of our preparing for activating our listing, we may have several appointments with the seller. It may start with the listing appointment that might be competitive. The seller decides they want to hire you. Now you go back to the property or you get back with the seller. Now you want to get your listing agreement signed, start to get the stuff ready, the information gathered to put their home on the market. So in the pre-listing meeting, before you meet with your seller, what do you guys think are some documents that we might want to provide? What are some documents that we might want to get ready to take with us to the listing appointment?
Repods.
Yeah, and your camera's not on, Donna. Yep. Possibly your seller disclosures, your Rpods, your MOG, your lead-based paint. Have
Service
those
providers.
documents. Say it again.
Service providers.
Service providers. This seller may look at you and say, we need to paint, or we may need to do the landscaping in the front yard. Do you have any recommendations? Maybe they want recommendations on an attorney. Chassis says working with real estate agent, disclosure and Q&A. Y'all utilize that Q&A. I think it's really helpful. I think it does a good job of explaining. Also mention the CMA and your comps. At some point in that appointment, the seller is going to ask, what do you think I can sell my house for? And you're not just going to blurt a number out. You're going to do some CMAs. You're going to do some comps and have something to take with you to discuss. You may want to have a listing agreement ready to go in case you're sitting there in the living room and the seller says, you're the one, I want to hire you. I wouldn't want to miss an opportunity because I said, okay, wait, I got to go home and draft it out, right? So you may want to consider having one of these here ready to go. As we mentioned, are working with real estate agent, our Rpods, property data sheet. Guys, especially if it's a competitive listing, don't go to the seller. Don't show up at your listing appointment and say, so what's your zoning here? Because if they're meeting with 3 agents and 2 of them walk in the front door knowing the zoning, and one is asking what the zoning is, which one looks better to the seller? Which one looks better prepared? So be prepared when you go. Any information about the property before you go. My general rule of thumb, when I show up for a listing appointment, I've learned everything about the property that I possibly can. The only thing I don't know is what the inside looks like. So when I walk through, I can get an idea. I can see previous MLS listings, right? But I still don't know exactly what it looks like, what the current owner did. So do your research. I think it'll help, especially because things are so competitive right now, not just for sellers, but guess what? Buyers are starting to do buyer consultation appointments, buyer agents interviews, if you will. So we always got to be prepared. The other thing I suggest, especially in this market, I would suggest it in any market, but especially in this market, is taking and going over the sample sales contract. Anytime you're given a form to a consumer, make sure it has sample stamped across it. We don't want to give them a tool that they think that they can use. You can go to NCAR, North Carolina Association of Realtors, and get all forms, and all forms can have samples stamped across them. But I think especially in this market, it's important that we start discussing with the seller the terms of the offer, because usually when an offer comes in, the seller only cares about how much and when. Those are their 2 questions. How much are they offering and when do they want to close? But we need them to understand that there are other points that are important. Due diligence, earnest money. The seller needs to understand that that's all they get if the buyer terminates, right? There is no other recourse. Is your seller going to offer a home warranty? Are they willing to pay any buyer pay closing costs? So by having this in your hand, you can kind of go through and you can say, when we get an offer, this is probably what it's going to be on, and this is what it's going to look like.
You're referring to the 2T? Okay.
Yep, sure enough. I'd rather them see the sample than have 15 offers come in, right? So at least we can have a conversation about it before. They're still going to be intimidated when 15 offers, 2 offers come in, right? 40 offers, however many, but at least we can have that conversation with them ahead of time. There's some documents. What do you think of some documents we can ask the seller to get ready for us? What are some things that, hey, I'll see you tomorrow. In the meantime, can you start getting me some information? What are some things we can ask the seller for? The deed, yeah. Don't we need to see the deed, the current deed? If the seller has the deed, we can pull it up, yes. But if the seller shows you theirs too, we can make sure that they match. Sometimes after people buy a house, they get married or divorced. So if anything changed, you want to make sure that you have the current deed.
Permits for any changes on the house by the since it was
Permits,
last
very
sold.
good. Yeah. COs, permits. That's great, John. If they've had any work done to the property, any permitted work done to the property. Remaining mortgage balance, absolutely. What are your approximate balances? One thing we're going to learn in our listing agreement is we ask for approximate balances. We'll talk about when we see that. I'm not trying to be nosy. I want to make sure you can afford to sell your house. And when you afford to sell your house, you can afford to pay me. I cannot imagine getting to closing and the seller saying, I don't have any money. You know, so have this hard conversation up front before you do the work. Any other lien information? Do you know of any other outstanding liens on your property? List of repairs, absolutely. What if they're in an HOA? Help them, have them ask them to gather the HOA docs for you. It's been my experience, and understand all HOAs are different, and you may have a different, but in general, it's been my experience that HOAs typically only want to deal with the owner. They don't want to talk to the agent. They don't want to talk to the buyer. They don't want to talk to the buyer's agent. They typically, now I've had some exceptions. I had one HOA manager, he was like, oh yeah, I got the covenants. You want me to drive by your office today? And I'm like, wow, that's not really necessary. No, not a problem. I'll drop them off about 2. Then he met with me and sat down and went over them with me. And I'm like, wow, look at you, you know. I call him the rare one because usually they won't talk to us. So that's why we have to have the seller help us get involved with the current HOA documents. Ask the seller if they have a survey. Did they have a survey done when they bought? Buyers, even if the seller is willing to share their survey, buyers should be encouraged to have their own survey done. But we can ask the seller if they have their survey. It may help us make sure. Now, understanding I'm not a surveyor, but if I have the survey, it may help me better identify the property lines, help me better identify the square footage of the lot, the acres. We'll talk a little bit more about that in just a second. So we both, I think both parties have a little bit of homework to do before we list, before we get ready to put this on the market. So we're heading into our listing meeting. We're heading into our listing appointment. But before we do that, we need to stop and take a step back, and we need to have a conversation about safety. We need to always be aware of safety, whether you're meeting the seller for the first time in their home, whether you're meeting for a buyer. As I mentioned yesterday, there is no amount of commission worth your safety. And I, you know, I see your families in the background. Abigail's got it made. It looks like she just had breakfast delivered to her. So that's pretty cool, you know, but I see your families there, and I'm telling you guys, no amount of commission is worth your safety. So always, always, always have your safety first. Will you guys promise me that? Safety always comes first. I've had agents not feel comfortable, and so they take a friend, they take a peer, a coworker to a listing appointment with them. You know, they present themselves as a team. So 2 agents go together. And gentlemen, this applies to you too. Please don't think that because you're a he, you're immune, right? Safety applies to all of us. We all always need to be careful. So let's just go through a couple. The Real Estate Commission provides us with a brochure. It's in their website. We can find it in just a second. But I took their brochure and I pulled out some of the points that they suggest, that they recommend that we take into consideration when it comes to safety. You may always want some form of protection on you. Anybody, I have my concealed carry. Anybody else have your concealed carry? Your firm may have a policy. Check with your firm's policy about whether or not what their preference is with your concealed carry. Even if you don't have your concealed carry, you can get mace, you can get a taser, you can get, I mean, guys, anything can be a weapon, right? If you're in fight or flight, anything can help you out. I also think every single one of you should take a self-defense class. I think there are, no, I don't think, I know there are ways that you can get out a situation if they, you know, grab you on the wrist or something, grab your arm. There's certain things you can do to help you get away. So I think you guys, and that might be a fun thing to do with your coworkers, right? You can make an afternoon out of it, make an appointment, go down to a dojo, do a self-defense class, and then go out for wine and charcuterie afterwards or something, right? Make it an office event. But I think all of you should look into and consider a self-defense class. I think we need to know who we're dealing with. Some agents have a policy before they meet a buyer or seller, they ask them to text them a picture of their driver's license. Some agents have a policy, we're going to Google you, or I'm going to look you up on social media before we meet. So just know, have an idea, best you can, who you're dealing with.
Wasp and hornet spray can be multifunctional as well.
Isn't that the truth, right? You get your hands on that, you are set. Tell someone, if you're going out on Saturday afternoon to show 10 appointments, let somebody know what your schedule is, where you're going to be, about what time. May that be a spouse, may that be a coworker, but let somebody know where you are when you're out and about. When I used to do open houses, not many of us are doing open houses anymore because we have nothing to hold open. But back in the day when we did open houses, I left the address of where I was on a Post-it note on the coffee table. So my husband knew where I was. And I did that like 9.5 times out of 10. And the one time I didn't do it, oh, I heard about it. So then I was really good about it for the next couple times. So let somebody know where you are, especially when it's somebody you may be out with all day or you don't know. Keep your phone close. I did not just say stay on your phone the whole time when you're with your clients, but keep your phone close. You know, as we just mentioned, we need an app to get into our super boxes, right? So if I have my phone out, it doesn't look like I'm chit-chatting on my phone. It looks like I need it to access the super box to get the key. So have your phone near you. We have these things tethered to us anyway. Winston-Salem Board of Realtors is trying to launch an app. I think it's a good idea. They just need to get it to take off, but it's their real safety app. And if you feel that you're in danger, you turn the app on and you hit the button, and any other agent nearby will get a notice. So then they can just kind of show up or something. You know what I'm saying? I wish there were more people that were doing it. Again, I think it's a great idea. It just hasn't taken off yet, but they're working on it. I know they just had another meeting about it the other day, trying to get more people involved. Always practice safety when you're doing an open house. This is funny to say, you guys, but the truth is, when we're doing open houses, we're sitting ducks, aren't we? We're telling the whole world, I'm going to be in this big empty house all by myself from 2 to 4 on Sunday. Come see me. So be very, very careful. I'm a big fan. Again, there's safety in numbers. You can bring a coworker with you. You can bring a non-licensed person with you to an open house. You need to let that non-licensed person know what their role is. Can they have many conversations with the people that come through? Make sure they know to let you do your job, right? Their role is just to be there for you. When I do an open house, I keep myself positioned at the front door. I see you coming down the street long before you ever get there. And I keep myself at the front door. I don't follow people around. I don't try to go with them from room to room. I keep myself at the front door. I'm there to greet you and to thank you for coming, provide you any information about the property. With that being said, I have this conversation with my sellers and I tell them, I'm not going to be following people around. I'm not going to be with them at all times. So you need to do your part and put your valuables up. Put your prescription meds somewhere other than the medicine cabinet and the kitchen cabinets. That real estate commission conference I went to last week, that was another common complaint the real estate commission is getting. Buyers and brokers taking prescription medications. And they got them on camera doing it. Guys, if people are buying a house, they should feel comfortable looking in the closets, looking in the kitchen cabinets. Can you guys agree with me? They can't go through dressers and desks, right? Personal property. But if they're buying a house, don't they have a right to see what the inside of the kitchen cabinet looks like? Don't they have a right to see what it looks like inside the closet? Those are not good places to put valuable stuff. Put your prescription meds somewhere else. Put your jewelry, your weapons, whatever, somewhere else. And have this conversation with your sellers. Remember, we said they can have video, They should not have audio. Another conversation for our sellers, and we'll see that in our listing agreement. Your firm may have an office safety policy, maybe in a stress code. So as you're going through your new agent orientation with your firm, you may learn about that. When it comes to your personal marketing, please don't make it too personal. It's hard to make a connection with somebody on a website. So you're typing up your profile and you want to try to make a connection when they're reading your profile, but you don't want to give out too much information about yourself. Never, ever, ever give out your home address, ever give out your home address. This is why you have an office. Give your office's address. I think it's okay to talk about your kids. You know, I have kids in elementary school, middle school, whatever. Just don't say too much about your kids. You want to protect your kids' safety. So it's a fine line between trying to market yourself, but not being too personal. You want to make a connection. If you read my profile page, you're going to see that I graduated from UNCG. The reason I have that in there is because I hope a consumer goes, I graduated from UNCG too. That's the connection I'm trying to make. Now you got two Spartans working together. Let's see what we can do. Always dress for safety. I tend to think ladies with our high heels. I mean, I know we can run away in our high heels, but can you run away in your high heels? And think about all this rain we had on Thursday. If you're walking a backyard and you're in those high heels, you're aerating the yard for the seller. You don't want to get stuck in the yard when you're trying to run away, right? So while I'm not telling you what to wear, I just ask that you consider your attire. Is it something you can get away with? Let's see. Chastity, I hate to hear that, but I'm glad you are more careful now. I think I kind of agree with you. It only takes one situation to make you really, really realize how potentially dangerous this can be. I mean, you guys think about it. We are opening ourselves up to the public. Are there weirdos in the public? You betcha. So we've got to protect ourselves from the public. So Chastity, I'm so glad you're okay. I'm with you. I even called a situation. I'll call it an incident at an open house. And I learned from it. I think something else we can consider is to not allow ourselves to be blocked in. If at all possible, I know it's not always possible, but if all possible, park on the street. If there's no street parking and you have to pull in the driveway, then it is what it is. But if all possible, park in the street. I know this is possible. When you're with buyers showing property, don't lead. Let your buyers walk into the primary bedroom first. Let your buyers walk through the house first. You follow them. First off, if we walk into the bedroom on the second story and I walk in first and my buyers walk in behind me, I'm trapped, aren't I? My only out is through the second story window. I've blocked myself into that bedroom. But I think another benefit of not leading, it's awfully hard for my buyers to imagine themselves living there when I'm standing there going, and this is the bedroom, right? They need to be able to walk into the room. They need to experience walking in and visualizing it for themselves without having me in the way. So I think by not, up and down stairs, I like them to go first. Always be aware of your surroundings. Guys, when you get out of the car with your buyers, they're looking around. They're looking at the neighborhood. They're looking at whether or not they can see themselves living here, right? You and I need to be looking at everything else. Look to see if there's somebody hiding behind the bush or, hanging out over there. Is there somebody look out of place? So we need to be aware of our surroundings. And I think the best advice I can offer you guys when it comes to safety is pay attention to that little voice in your head. And when that little voice in your head tells you to get the heck out, listen to it. Get the heck out. You may feel silly afterwards, but that voice has been around for, my goodness, we were cavemen when that voice came about, right? It's there for a reason. So make sure that you listen to that little voice in your head. It's there for a reason. Comments on our safety. Again, we're not doing many open houses now, but they'll come back. As we get more inventory, we'll start seeing more open houses. It's a great way to meet buyers. It's a great opportunity to help sell your listing, but you need to be careful. When you're talking with your sellers, we need to encourage them to pack stuff up anyway, right? Take down the personal effects. Again, it's much easier for a buyer to imagine themselves living there when they're not looking at pictures of your kids. So have your sellers start to depersonalize the house anyway. They're moving anyway, right? Why not send them out and have them get totes and boxes and start packing stuff? But we can have them depersonalized, not just to help sell it, but also to help protect them, help protect those personal items, keep small things away. Again, don't put things in kitchen cabinets and closets. People may be looking in there. Lock it up, or better yet, put them, if they're really worried about it, have them put them in the trunk of their car while they leave for the day, right? Have them take it with them. I was showing a house once. My buyer and I walked into the primary bedroom. The seller had taken their meds that morning and just took one and chucked it on the bed. There were like 6 prescription pill bottles just laying on the bed. I was like, you know, this isn't like they left their bowl of cereal in the sink, right? I mean, this is something that, and I let the agent know, I said, I think you need to have a conversation with your sellers, because what if, you know, what if? Sometimes sellers claim that things get missing. There was a case a couple years ago. Buyers were going around open houses and she was taking ice cream. I don't know why, but she was going to like the deep freezer in the garage, and she had one of those big massive purses, you know, that some women carry. And so she was taking ice cream, and people talk, you know, agents talk. We got these private Facebook groups, you know, and it came to be that several agents had the same experience with this person taking their, so I don't know. Is it the thrill of stealing? Are they hard up for ice cream? I'm not really sure, but you know, at least it was just ice cream. I guess it could have been a lot worse, but sometimes people show up to open houses to scope the place out, see if it's worth coming back later to break into. Again, not everybody that comes to your open house is a good, honest buyer that wants to buy. So just be cautious. Comments on safety? So now that we've gone over safety, we've done our pre-listing activities. So now we're ready to meet with the seller. So you show up for your listing appointment. If you haven't already done your working with real estate agent, if you've already hit first substantial contact over the phone, you've already done your working with real estate agent. But if you haven't hit first substantial contact yet, when you show up, one of the first things you need to do is sit down and discuss working with real estate agent with these sellers. Again, competitive listing appointments, and you may or may not know if you're on a competitive listing appointment. If I were you, I would treat every listing appointment as if it was competitive. Take your A game every single time. But the seller needs to understand, clearly understand, that if they're talking to 3 agents and they hire somebody else, I don't owe them confidentiality. Remember, I only owe them confidentiality when they decide to hire me. Also, what we're going to do in that listing appointment is discuss how we're going to market the property. What are things that your firm does to advertise? Some sellers don't want a sign in the front yard. Some sellers don't want their homes splattered all over the internet. So we need to have these conversations. Don't assume they're okay. Some sellers may look at you and say, do you do any print media? Because again, not all buyers not all people rely on the internet. So they may want to know that you're doing things other than putting it in MLS. So have your marketing plan. How are you going to market their property? And then of course we need to discuss compensation. If you don't bring it up, promise me the seller will. If the seller doesn't bring it up, we still need to have this conversation. And again, just be so very careful in your wording. My firm charges X amount. My firm's policy is. We need to explain our agency relationship. Again, the warning to sellers, don't you tell me, that's a Miranda rights, right? Don't you tell me anything. Anything you say can be held against you. If they hire another firm and I later bring a buyer client, my loyalty is to the buyer client, right? It's not to the seller that didn't hire me, that had the nerve to hire somebody else. My loyalty is to the buyer client. And they need to understand that. They have a right to understand that. They also have the right to understand our duty to disclose material facts. We're going to talk about our Rpods in just a second. But they need to understand it doesn't matter how you complete the Rpods. I always have a duty to disclose material facts. So as we're going through the house together, and we're having this conversation before we go through the house together. Don't let them go through the house and point out everything that's wrong with it and then say, oh yeah, I got to tell people that, right? Warn them up front, let them know up front, be honest, be fair. And then helping the seller with the document. So listing agreement, Rpods, MOG, those seller disclosures that we're getting ready to talk about. I take try it MLS. You can print out the input sheet. You can download it too, but you can print it out. And there's a couple pages somewhere in the middle where it like all the interior features, all the exterior features, all the appliances are going to stay, everything about this listing. I go old school. I print it out, put it on a clipboard and take my pencil and I go through and I'm like, yep, this one has ceiling fans. This one has smoke detectors. This one's attic access is in the hall, right? I go through because guys, I'm here to tell you, after a while, they all run together. And you're going to get home and you're going to say, now, was it this house that had that or was it that? So if you want to look professional and not call your seller later and say, did you have ceiling fans? My suggestion is that you take it and go through while you're sitting there. Yes, I thank you, MLS, for providing us that. I'm assuming Triangle and others have something else, but yeah, I'm serious. I whip out the clipboard, pencil, you know. I'm sure you can find something on your phone. We're going to go through with the seller and inspect the property. We want to do a walkthrough, preferably with the seller. As John mentioned earlier, what if they had recent work done? Oh yeah, we just had, we just spent $25,000 to have, did you pull permits? These are the kind of things that we need to make sure that we're paying attention to. If you see new paint, if you smell new paint, like, oh, wow, y'all just painted this room. Did you do it or did you have a contractor do it? Right. We got to go through and ask questions. Any recent repairs, anything they plan to do before they list. And noting any material facts. One thing I always like to ask the seller that I like to use in my public remarks, I ask the seller, what's your favorite thing about this house? What is your favorite thing? Is it the bay window that you can sit and have your morning coffee? Is it the breakfast nook? Is that, what is your favorite part of the house? Because I can use that to help market it, see yourself sitting here having your morning coffee kind of thing. When we go through, we're going to go through a room by room, go through the whole home. Some agents poke their heads in attics, some in crawl spaces, others don't. I suggest you at least open the door, right? I don't know that you need to get up there and get in it or in the crawl space, but I do suggest you at least pop your head in and make sure nothing goes crazy and ask questions. You guys are going to be surprised about how many homeowners don't go into their attic and how many homeowners don't go into their crawl space. So ask questions. When was the last time you've been down here? Did you notice any signs of leaking, any signs of flooding? MLS input sheet, again, we can use that as a checklist, make sure we got everything to best describe the property. Again, what we're trying to do with our words is paint a picture. I know we actually have pictures. We may even have videos, but we have pictures and videos and words. We use every avenue we can to help market and advertise that property. We need to identify personal property that's gonna go, or personal property that's gonna stay, excuse me, personal property that's gonna stay and fixtures that are gonna go. If your seller is gonna take a fixture, in a perfect world, we'll have the seller take the fixture down before we ever show up for picture day. Right? What a buyer doesn't know, if they, as soon as they see it and they find out they can't have it, you know, they bought this house, will come with the chandelier, right? So in a perfect world, encourage your sellers to take that fixture down and replace it before you ever show up for picture day. Is it a perfect world? No. So if the seller says, nope, I'm not taking that chandelier down until I move out the day before settlement, all right. It's now my responsibility as a listing agent to let every potential buyer know that when they purchase that home, that chandelier is not going to be there. Maybe the seller is going to offer them a budget. Maybe we can work with, that's a conversation with you and the seller. We don't want to leave a light bulb on a string in the dining room, right? We want to try to leave something for the buyers. As far as personal property, hands down, the number one personal property is that dang refrigerator. So go ahead and ask the seller, are you gonna take your fridge? Because you know a buyer's gonna ask you. So when you're in the kitchen, go ahead and say, y'all taking that fridge, or are you gonna plan to leave it? You know, have that conversation with them. Again, we're noting significant property defects inside and out. If you have questions about the boundaries, ask to see their survey if they don't have it, if they do have it. Anything inside, if you notice a water stain in the ceiling, you're gonna ask questions about it. Anything you notice that looks off, we have to ask questions about it. This could get awkward pretty fast, right? Presumably, I just met these people and I'm going, what are your balances? What are the problems with the home? Do you have any encroachments, right? We're getting awfully personal, awfully fast. We're doing it not only to protect us, but we're doing it to protect them as well. We can always suggest repairs and improvements, things that may increase the value. We can suggest, do they have to do anything? No, but if they say, what can I do to get the top value? Well, maybe if you paint the front door and redo the landscaping, that'll help our curb appeal, right? We can always make suggestions on how it could be a more marketable property. It may not be a bad idea to go through with a buyer's hat. Go through it through the eyes of a buyer. What's a buyer looking for? If you see something that's broke or needs repaired, the buyer's going to hone on in on that pretty quickly, aren't they? They're going to see that right away. And they're going to have a hard time wondering why they're paying that price when they know they got to immediately fix this, this, and this. I think all homes are sellable. We just got to find the right price. Regardless of their condition, we just got to find the right price. And again, ask questions. We mentioned pulling permits, if they've had work done. If the property is not on public sewer, we need to ask about the on-site system, on-site septic system. Do they have an improvement permit? If they don't, we need to have them contact the county health department and get that. A good buyer's agent is going to ask for it. Yes. Another reason why we need to see that permit before we list the property, and this is getting a lot of real estate agents in trouble. We are falsely advertising the number of bedrooms on properties with an on-site septic. So the general rule of thumb says 2 human heartbeats per bedroom. So if the permit has a 3-bedroom house, that means the septic system will support 6 people living there. Everybody with me? They tell you the number of bedrooms on the permit on an on-site. Now, if it's public, you can have as many bedrooms in there as you want. This is only specific to an on-site septic. There's been so many times I've been showing properties It's advertised as a 3-bedroom home with an office. And we're standing in the office going, why would this not be? This could be a perfectly good 4th bedroom. Why is it not? Because the permit only says 3. Real Estate Commission has been cracking down on this. Agents are getting popped. You're going to start seeing it in the disciplinary action now that I'm pointing it out to you. Don't advertise the number of bedrooms that the seller tells you. Advertise the number of bedrooms that the septic permit tells you. So interesting, you requested for a home built in 1964. Did the county send somebody out to inspect it?
No, I just sent a request, you know, through an email or online, and got a call back, and she said, oh, well, we didn't start keeping those records till 1965.
So your seller may just need to have them come out now. And guys, be warned. The only way I know how to inspect a septic system, they're showing up with a backhoe, because the septic system is what, underground, right? So the only way they can inspect it. So warn your sellers about that before you get that panic phone call. They're digging up my yard. Breathe. So if they're doing a septic inspection, maybe to pull a permit, maybe the buyer has ordered a septic inspection as part of their due diligence. I had a coworker about a year ago now, I guess maybe a year and a half ago. And he went on a listing appointment that was on an on-site septic. And he said something to the sellers about their 3-bedroom house. And the sellers got livid. We bought a 4th bedroom. Don't you see that room? Na, 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 na. Could you imagine those poor sellers? You think you're buying a 4-bedroom and then told you can only sell it as a 3? This is why the commission's cracking down on us. Always start with the county health department. They can come out. Donna, that may be what you guys have to do, is just order. Because you're right. We didn't start. Counties weren't good about keeping records always. Now they are, but they may have a period of time where they don't have them. Comments on that? Questions? Anything on the inspections? Ask questions. That's the only way I know to learn stuff. How about you guys? Ask questions, point at stuff. Does custom built, custom design, does that make you guys a little nervous? Does that make your eye twitch a little bit? Who's it custom built for? So when they start going through going, this was custom built, this was custom design. Okay, is the next owner going to see the value in this? I can't answer that. And every time I hear custom built, I also hear cha-ching, cha-ching, cha-ching on the price, because you know there was customization involved. So again, just ask questions. All right, let's talk about our Residential Property Disclosure Act. When we talk about the act, we're referring to 2 forms. We're referring to our Residential Property and Owners Association Disclosure Statement, also known as the Rpods. And we're also referring to the Mineral and Oil and Gas Rights Disclosure, also known as the MOG. By the way, if you're following along in your book, we just went back to chapter 8 for a minute. We're going back to chapter 8 and picking this up. Everybody good if going forward, I just refer to the Rpods and the MOG instead of trying to say this every time. Don't we love real estate? If we can make an acronym out of it, by golly, we're going to. So it just makes life so much easier, as long as everybody knows what the acronym means. So Rpods and MOG. I'm referring to our seller disclosures. These forms are interesting. These are mandatory forms with optional disclosure. Mandatory forms means the seller has to complete them. The caveat emptor says the seller doesn't have to disclose anything. We'll talk about the seller's options, how we discuss with the seller. The majority of our forms that we use on a day-to-day basis, our agency agreements, our offer to purchase and contract, most of the forms that we use are NCAR forms. North Carolina Association of Realtors. That's why we have NCARs, because they provide our forms. There's very few forms that the Real Estate Commission provides. The Rpods and the MOG are two of the forms provided by the Real Estate Commission. There is no other form we can use. The Real Estate Commission says these are the forms. By the way, the other one that the Real Estate Commission does is our working with real estate agent disclosure. So those three forms are the only ones done by the commission. Everything else is NCAR. So mandatory forms, optional disclosure. The seller has choices. They can check yes or no representation. We'll look at these both in just a second. They have to check one. Guys, if a seller checks no representation, I'm not suggesting you don't have a flag go up, but please don't automatically assume that the seller is shady and trying to hide something. There might be a reason why they're checking no representation. Maybe they don't know. What if it's an estate? What if you're, for example, selling your parents? I haven't lived in my parents' house in over 20 years. I don't know the condition, the components, other than, you know, when I show up, sit in the living room. I may not be able to represent the components. I say, what if it's a house that you've rented for the last 10 years? You haven't lived there. Sometimes you have shady sellers that are trying to hide something. But remember, once you and I learn about a material fact, if they say no representation and you and I learn about it, we still have to disclose it. So please don't get excited when you see that. Don't tell your buyer, oh, there's something going on here. I think that's a very common misconception out there, and I don't think that's fair to all the sellers. If your seller checks yes or no,
I got a question.
Honest. Okay.
As the listing agent, if my client checks no representation, but I'm aware of something and I talk to them and they just don't want to do that, I'm obligated to disclose that. Where do I disclose that? In the MLS?
Advertising, agent only remarks. You can send an email to interested buyers. You can call the buyer's agent and say, by the by. It doesn't matter how you get the information out.
Is it sufficient if I put it in agent only remarks?
Yeah.
That's good enough?
Yeah.
Okay.
Doesn't matter how you get it out. Now,
Because if I'm getting 45 offers, calling all 45 folks and say, so, okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. If you have an unrepresented buyer, know that they don't have access to agent only. So if you have an unrepresented buyer, you may need to call that buyer and say, by the way, the roof leaks, right?
Okay.
Here's the Rpods. They don't have access to MLS if they don't have an agent. You with me? But yeah, agent only. That's why we have the agent only remarks.
Okay.
Again, there's no ruling on how we get the information. I wouldn't put it in public only. You know, bring all offers, roof leaks, right? I wouldn't do that. But you got to get it out there somehow. And I would try to get it out, plumber, before those 45 offers come in. Because once those offers come in and then you tell them that the roof leaks, that may affect their offer price. You with me? So agent only is a great avenue. Maybe you can put it in your showing instructions. Maybe you have something in the house, maybe in your literature in the house. I would still want to make sure that they saw that. If your seller checks yes or no, they have to do so truthfully. Even the seller isn't allowed to lie. They don't have to disclose, but they're not allowed to lie. Let's see. I had this in the chat and I forgot to get it. I know a couple of you may have joined us late. So there's our YouTube channel. If you didn't get it before, just click on it or copy and paste it, and then you can save it. I think you can subscribe to it in YouTube. I think that's the verbiage for YouTube. So that's our link. And then it is break time. So let's take 10. When we come back, we're going to keep talking about our Rpods. So 10 minutes. All right. How we doing? Is he going to get all of us a Starbucks? That's the other thing I miss about in person, right? I mean, if I had a hankering for donuts this morning, I could go get a box and not have to worry about eating them all. You know? All right. So the Rpods Act, I should say the Residential Property Disclosure Act, specifically the Rpods. This applies to transfers of residential real property consisting of 1 to 4 dwelling units. So if the unit is 5 or more dwellings, the Rpods isn't required. Okay, so if you're selling a large apartment building, for example. It also applies, and I think this is important. This applies whether or not the seller is using an agent or not. Just because you're for sale by owner doesn't mean it's an out for you not to complete the Rpods. Again, this is a tool that I know some agents use to get in front of FSBOs. They may knock on the door, they may call them if they're not on the do not call, or they may email them if they can get a hold of them, and they say, hey, I see you're selling your house for sale by owner. I just want to throw my name and number out there. If you have any questions, I'm happy to help. By the way, did you know there was a mandatory disclosure that you're expected? And the seller may say, well, gee, I didn't know that. What else don't I know? Maybe I do need an agent. So some agents use this as a tool. There are some exemptions. If you will, turn with me in your book to page 181. Or if you're on the digital version, we're in the Unit 8 material around the Rpods discussion. All the exemptions are listed there. Who might be exempt from the Rpods and the MOG, both of them are there. We can also find these. A lot of our forms have guidelines to completing. And one of those forms that have a guideline to complete is our standard offer to purchase and contract. So you're also going to find the exemptions to these forms in the guidelines to completing the offer to purchase and contract. I think for the Rpods, the biggest exemption that we're going to see is new construction, or more specifically, never before lived in dwelling. If nobody has ever lived there, new construction that nobody's lived in yet is going to be exempt from the Rpods. It is required, new construction is required for the MOG. But as you can see on page 181, transfer leases, for example, Rpods may not be required, court orders, spouse to spouse. Then you have the list there. What you're looking at for the MOG is the same as the above, except the following. So first sale of a dwelling never inhabited is required for the MOG. It's not required for the Rpods. So if you're not including it in your listing, just make sure it's a proper exemption. Here in the Triad MLS, things may be different outside, but here in the Triad MLS, the majority of the time we see these in MLS as an attachment. And just understand those attachments don't go out to the public. The MLS attachments are something internal for us only. So again, if an unrepresented buyer, they may not have access to an agent. If they don't have access to an agent, they don't have access to the Rpods. So if you're the listing agent and a buyer shows up without an agent, you need to get that to the buyer. You need to assist them in getting it. What if your buyer is making an offer on a FSBO? Do we need to help get that to the FSBO so they can complete, so we can share it with our buyer? Absolutely. Absolutely. We all have a duty to help the buyer get it. The act that regulates the Rpods and the MOG says that owners are required to complete it. So it's important that we understand who an owner is. Who does an act define as the owner? And this is anybody with a recorded present or a future interest in the property. An example of a future interest in the property might be somebody that's going to obtain the property via a life estate. So they don't own the property yet, but they're in line. They are considered the owner. People that are not owners, the trustee, if a trustee is hired to manage a trust and on behalf of a beneficiary, the mortgage holder, the lien holders, and if anybody has an easement, they're not considered owners under the definition of the Residential Property Disclosure Act. It is the seller's responsibility to make sure that the buyer gets this form no later than the time they're ready to make an offer. We assist, we help, absolutely, but it is the seller's responsibility. We can help deliver it to the buyer. I cannot sign it on behalf of the buyer. I cannot complete this form on behalf of the seller. This is a seller's form to complete, and I cannot sign it on behalf of the buyer. My job is to help provide it and deliver it, get it to the buyer. Again, if you're going through MLS, more often than not, it's going to be an attachment. Sometimes when you don't see it in MLS, and this is the voice of personal experience speaking. I had a situation once, I couldn't get my seller to do it. They kept dragging their feet. And we listed the property and I still didn't have it. And I had agents call me left and right. Who looked like the fool here? I was trying my hardest, but I could not, it wasn't important to them. If you have sellers drag their feet, we need to understand what they're giving up. If the buyer doesn't receive this one, this is finally how I got it. I'm like, look, the buyer can terminate. They'll get their due diligence back. They'll get their earnest money back, and you won't have a contract. What do we need to do? Thank you. Please complete this form. You know, y'all, it was a battle. Do you think I had all these battles documented? Heck yeah, I did. I had a heck of a time. But that's the thing. That's what the seller needs to understand. There's a certain timeline for the buyer to terminate. We'll look at that in just a second. But ultimately, the seller's failure to deliver the form is the buyer's right to cancel. It's important that we understand the buyer's right to cancel is due to them not getting the form. It has nothing to do with how the seller completes it. They may not like that the seller said no representation, but the seller did their obligation. They did their duty and they completed it. Everybody with me? So the buyer's right to cancel because they didn't get it, not because they don't like it. If the buyer does cancel because they did not receive this, they have to notify the seller or their agent in writing of their intent to cancel. In our book, I have a question too. What about email? I would get with your BIC on that, because our book says that notice of the buyer's cancellation for failure to receive these forms has to be hand delivery, USPS, or via the seller's agent. So I guess the seller's agent, that's how that little loophole, we can send an email there as well. if
So an email is okay, Julie?
it
Sorry.
says, or the seller's agent, so
Okay.
it doesn't specify, and that was my flag. Why doesn't
Okay.
it specify email? But if the seller's agent is delivering it via email, then,
USPS, is that certified letter?
I would for that proof, right? I mean, it doesn't specify, but yeah, I would do certified mail so you can, or you can take it to the listing company's office and have them sign off on it that they received, right? I would just have that documentation. So if the buyer doesn't receive this, again, we'll look at that timeline in just a second when they're entitled to it. If the buyer doesn't receive the Rpods, for example, and they choose to terminate because they didn't see it, they terminate in writing. As we said, the buyer's entitled to a refund of their deposits, and that does include due diligence and earnest money. There's very few outs. There's very few opportunities for the buyers to get their due diligence back. And this is one of them. And again, this doesn't negate the fact that the buyer, if they choose not to terminate, they can still have their due diligence. They can still do inspections. Guys, regardless of how the seller completes this form, the buyer should be encouraged to do their inspections, to do their due diligence. So even if the seller goes through and says, yes, everything's wrong with this house, we should still have the buyer encourage them to do their own inspections. So where's our responsibility with this? The rule says a broker acting as an agent in a transaction has the duty to inform each of their clients of the client's rights and obligations. Provided we've done our job, we shall not be responsible for the owner's refusal to provide a prospective purchaser with the disclosure. Remember earlier I said I documented every attempt I made to get my seller to complete that form. I document. I cannot make anybody do anything. So if they refuse to do it, they dig in their heels and say, completing forms is your job. I'm not doing your, I can't complete it for the seller, right? So if they're not willing to do it, I can't do it for them. And if they're not gonna do it, all I can do is document that I made several attempts to get them to complete it. When it comes to these forms, the listing agent's duties, we need to let the seller know whether or not they have to complete it. Again, if it's a build or new construction, if it's a transfer of a court order, we need to, be familiar with those exemptions, have little flags go up of when exemptions may apply. We also have the basic duty of explaining the seller's statutory duties. Yes, no, or no representation. Be honest. You don't have to represent, but if you do, say yes or no. And I think it's important that we let the seller know failure to complete this form gives the buyer an out. They have a choice. Do they have to terminate? No, but it gives them the option. It gives them the opportunity. Now, this market, it's probably not a big deal, right? Because if this buyer terminates, there's 30 other buyers standing in the front yard with offers in their hand. But that pendulum's going to swing back. We're not always going to be in this market. And we're going to be back in a situation where the home sits on the market for 5-6 months before you get an offer. Do you want that seller to lose that buyer because they refuse to do the Rpods? Wait another 5 months for another offer? As the buyer's agent, when it comes to the Rpods, we have a duty to explain their right to cancel. Remember, their right to cancel is not because they don't like how it's completed. It's because they didn't get it. So if your buyer says, I'm trying to get you this Rpods, the listing agent's trying to get it from the seller, and the buyer says, what happens if I don't get it? You can terminate. Again, we'll see that in just a second. As buyer's agents, we also have a duty to support the act. Explain what the act means, what the people's duties are. Our failure to do our job, our failure to provide the form and try to get the seller completed could turn into a violation of license law. So document, document, document. Document all your attempts. Remember what we said, if you have a phone call, a verbal phone call of substance, go home and follow it up with an email. Per our discussion, see attached, this is Rpods that I need you to do. And then save that sent email. So everybody, listing agent, I know this is listing, but we all have a duty to provide the seller with the disclosures, get them in their hands. I think we talked about this yesterday when we talked about dot loop. I find these forms very complicated to do on dot loop. Maybe you have a better system than I do. I tend just to go old school and leave them behind and tell them to complete it, and then I'll pick it up later. I like it in writing. Again, there's no ruling on how you get it complete, but I tend to think it gets awfully confusing trying to do it in an electronic version. So I just take it, discuss it, give them homework. See, even I give my clients homework too, not just you guys. I think they need to know our requirements to disclose material facts. Again, it doesn't matter how they complete it. We've already had this conversation before we listed, right? Now here we are getting ready to put it on the market. So it doesn't hurt to remind them once they complete it. I see here you said no representation, but I know that the roof leaks. So even though you said no representation, remember, I have an obligation to disclose that. I can assist the seller in completing the form. I cannot complete it for them. I can answer questions. I can help them identify possible concerns. I had a seller once, bless her heart, she was probably mid to late 80s. She didn't have an email. We were doing her listing paperwork at her kitchen table. I whipped that form out. Have you guys seen it yet? The print's pretty small. She looked at me and said, Julie, I can't read that. I said, all right. So we went through it together line by line. I didn't do it for her. I assisted her in completing it. And then we have a duty to assist in delivering it to the buyers. Again, I think the most common way to do this if the seller lists is to go through, put it in as an MLS attachment. For sale by owner, they need to figure it out as well. We keep these disclosures current throughout the listing. This is something else I saw a lot last year in the disciplinary, in the bulletins. You guys see this? Let's say the seller says, yes, this is broke, and then they get it fixed. We need to have the seller update the Rpods. What if the seller says, no, this isn't broke, and then it breaks? We need to assist the seller in updating the Rpods. We've got to keep it current throughout the listing. If the listing agent is working with the buyer as well, not only do we explain to the seller, if you don't complete this, this is the buyer's right to terminate, but we also have to explain it to our buyer, right? So if we're in a dual agency situation, we need to explain both sides to both parties. And then I think we're all pretty good about keeping everything, all documents, everything that anybody signed, put it in your transaction file. Because what do we document? Everything. And that includes all of our forms as well. So make sure you keep that in the transaction file. If you're acting as a seller sub-agent, I still need to assist in delivering it to the buyer. Everybody's got to deliver this to the buyer. And I still notify them of their review the note to purchaser, their right to terminate if they failure to get it. And I'm going to keep a copy of it. Just because I'm a seller sub-agent doesn't mean I still don't document, still doesn't mean that I can't assist. Remember, I'm trying to get everybody to the finish line, and that does include the applicable forms. As a seller sub-agent, I owe it to my seller to get this information to the buyer, not my buyer, but the buyer. And then if you're a buyer's agent, we're going to take that a step further. Yeah, I'm going to get it to him. I'm going to review the note of purchaser. I'm going to keep the copy. But now I can have conversations with them about it. That's the difference in old car versus client versus customer, right? Customer, I just hand it to him and say, here you go, sign here. Client, I say, here you go. This is what this means. And they said, no, here, yes, here. So let's see what this is about, right? We can like have a further conversation. That's the difference of level of service. If something's checked, yes, this is broke. The buyer says, what do I do? Okay, let's, home inspection. What's the home inspector recommend? Do we need to talk to an electrician, a plumber, a general contractor, whomever? And for about the 7th or 8th time since we've been together, we always have a duty to discover and disclose material facts, regardless of our role, regardless of how the disclosures are complete. I never have a reason not to disclose material facts.
Julie, I have a quick question.
Yeah, sure.
If you see a house that goes on the market and you know something about that house, but then you don't see it in the disclosures or any of the information in MLS about this, like, something about this house, do we because I'll be like, there's a house in my neighborhood that I know stuff about that's been listed with another agent from another office, but nowhere in the disclosures is this big piece of information about this home. Do I have an obligation to call that listing agent? Because I genuinely don't think that the sellers told her, but I know it as a neighbor. Do I have an obligation to call that listing agent?
I'm going to say no, because you're not involved in that transaction. You may want to get with your BIC, but I appreciate what you're, but that gets awfully tricky now, doesn't it? Because you're not working with the seller, somebody else is. Now, if you bring a buyer, right, if you have the buyer client, then you absolutely have an obligation. But just to be an outside agent, I don't think that would be necessary. I don't know if you know the sellers or not. I wouldn't want to step over the agent's toes if you do. So I wouldn't want to go straight to the seller and say, you should have told your agent this, and this. I guess my questions to you, just for you to consider, these latent defects, these things that the agent should see. But again, I'm not trying to step on anybody's toes and say blah, blah, blah. You know what I'm saying? Kind of rhetorical questions. So I would say no, but you may want to run it by your BIC and get their opinion as well. But that's getting into an interesting territory now, isn't it? But you're not involved in the transaction unless you bring the buyer. Okay, so let's take just a few minutes. And here under forms, let's look at our Rpods. And I got to make this big because, again, the wording is itty bitty. So the Rpods starts with instructions to property owners. And what the instructions to property owners tells them about the Disclosure Act. It tells them about their obligation to furnish a copy to the buyer. This is the only one approved for this purpose. You can't create your own. You can't hire an attorney. The Real Estate Commission says this is all we can use. Tells us when we would use it, when it's not required, first sale of dwelling, never inhabited. And then it tells the owner, again, you guys, this is another example of when we can let the forms help us put words in our mouth. So we have this conversation with the seller. When you're completing this, you respond to each question by placing a check in the appropriate box. In responding to the questions, you are only obligated to disclose information about which you have actual knowledge. If you check yes, you have to explain. If the seller says yes, they're saying this is broke or it's not working properly, right? So if they say yes, it's not working. And then there's a place to explain. There's a little place to explain. If they need more information, they can attach additional pages if necessary. If they check no, they are stating that they have no actual knowledge of the problem. I think this is what scares sellers. No actual knowledge of the problem. You know, again, you have homeowners that haven't been in their attic in 5 years, right? So if they're saying, no, the roof doesn't leak, is the actual knowledge because they've been up there recently and checked? Or is there actual knowledge because they haven't been up there in 5 years, right? So I think that's the important one, that we make sure before they check that they understand what they're checking. Or they can say no representation, you are choosing not to disclose, even if you have actual knowledge or should have known that. So if your buyer, if your seller says, well, the roof doesn't leak, but I haven't been up there in 5 years, it might be in everybody's best interest if they say no representation, right? So we can advise, I can't complete it for them, but I can advise them. If you check yes or no and something happens to the property to make your disclosure inaccurate, you must promptly give the buyer a corrected disclosure statement to correct the problem. So again, the agents assist in this. So if we complete it and then the condition changes, we need to help getting the seller to do a new one and get the new copy to the buyer, make sure they have that. And again, I have seen that several times in the bulletin over the last 6-8 months. So I don't know why this is gaining in popularity down at the Real Estate Commission, but this has been a very common theme I've seen recently. Something changed in the condition and the Rpods wasn't updated. If you are assisted in the sale of a property, you're still responsible for completing this, the statement providing to buyers. The broker must disclose any material facts about your property, which they know, should reasonably know. So again, the form helps us explain this. You know, we're providing the forms, we're having conversations. Don't trust that people read this stuff, you guys, because people aren't reading. Don't have the conversation, but make sure they note that thing. You have to give the complete disclosure to the buyer no later than the time the buyer makes an offer. If you do not, the buyer under certain circumstances can cancel. We'll look at note to buyer in just a second. You should give a copy of your disclosure statement with your signature and keep a copy signed by the buyer for your records. Remember, we have a duty to deliver instruments too. How long do we have to deliver instruments? Anybody remember? 3 days. 3 days from when it's executed, from when it's signed. Okay, so in other words, I can't wait till the end of the transaction and say, great transaction, here's all of our transactional documents. We send everything within 3 days of execution. And that, I mean, general rule of thumb, if they design it, if they sign it, they deserve a copy of it. Make sense? Is that fair? Then there's a note to buyer. So it depends on what role you're in, right? If you're the listing agent, I would spend more time focusing on this. If I was a buyer's agent, I would spend more time focusing on this. If the owner does not give you the disclosure by the time you're making the offer, you may, under certain circumstances, cancel any resulting contract without penalty to you. To cancel this contract, you must personally deliver or mail written notice of your decision to the owner or the owner's agent within 3 calendar days following your receipt, or 3 calendar days following the date of the contract, whichever occurs first. Here are our timelines for the buyer's right to terminate. They can terminate either within 3 calendar days following the date of the contract or 3 calendar days following the date of receipt. So let's look at a timeline here. Here's our timeline. Well, the owner should have this before we present the offer. What this is saying is we can present the offer. This is a swift moving market. I would hate for a buyer to miss out on an opportunity because we're sitting around waiting on the Rpods. So we can present the offer. And I think this is where this applies. We're looking at either, let's say you got your days, let's see, you got receipt, IPT. You have receipt. Well, that didn't work, did it? This is receipt. Still didn't work. Okay, that's receipt. We go under contract here. It starts from 3 days. Which happened first? I guess is what I'm trying to say. Which happened first? Did receipt happen first, or did contract formation happen first? So you receive it, you go under contract. 3 days from receipt could be the day after you go under contract. Or you go under contract and then you receive it, you have 3 days from receipt. So you need to stop and ask yourself, which one happened first? Did you receive it and then go under contract? That's 3 days from receipt. Did you go under contract and then receive it? That's 3 days from contract. So it's 3 days from whichever one happened first. Does that make sense? I tried to draw a picture and I think I ended up messing it up. So let me do away with my picture and make sure we're good with that. 3 days from whichever happened first. So again, don't hold back on an offer because your buyer doesn't have this. Understand that your buyer has an out, especially in this market where things are moving so fast. Let's see. So in the space below, we have a place for the property address and the owner's name. Print the owner's name. Owner acknowledgement, have examined the disclosure before signing that all information is true and correct as of the date signed. So that's what the owner's signing is, that they didn't lie. Their information is accurate. We'll come back to buyers in just a second. I'm sure you guys have seen this, maybe in pre-licensing, maybe with an actual buyer or seller. The following questions address the characteristics and condition of the property identified above, about which the owner has actual knowledge. Where the question refers to a dwelling, it is intended to refer to the dwelling unit or units of more than one. And then it gives a whole laundry list, things about the home. And the seller completes to the best of their knowledge. And what year was the dwelling constructed? They may or may not know that. They can't, either they put a year in or they put no representation. Can we help them find a year, get a guesstimate for a year? We may be able to help them out with that. Is there any malfunction with the foundation, slab, fireplace, chimney, floors, windows, doors, ceilings, walls, attached garage, patio, deck, anything wrong with this? If they say yes, we got a place further down for them to explain what is the defect, what is the malfunction. Exterior walls, brick, veneer. Remember what we said about synthetic stucco. Synthetic stucco will always be a material fact, even if it's been repaired or replaced. What year was the dwelling's roof installed? Approximate, if no records are available. If your seller's not sure, you may want to have them say about 2015. Right? Make sure that they're not certifying it was 2015. So approximate if we don't have records. Are there any leaks in the roof? Is there water seepage, leakage, or dampness in the basement crawl space or slab? Are there any malfunctions with electrical? Any malfunctions with plumbing? Malfunctions with the heat or the AC? What is the heat source? What is the cooling source? What's its fuel source? Is it electric? Is it natural gas? Water supply, city, county, well. Same thing with septic down here in just a second. We can always look at utility bills, right? Utility bills will spell out if they're paying for water, if they're paying for sewer. So we can maybe ask for a copy of utility bills. What are the pipes made of? We talked about polybutylene pipes the other day, yesterday. Seller hopefully disclosing that. Here's our sewage disposal system. If it is, If it is on a septic, how many bedrooms are allowed per the improvement permit? So the seller has the option to put that in if they so choose, or no records are available. Is there any malfunction with the sewer or septic system? Is there any malfunction with central vacuum, pool, hot tub, spa, attic fan? I mean, it just goes on and on and on. Lists everything. The seller's opportunity to disclose as they wish. Is there any issues with the attached microwave, the dishwasher, disposal, etc.? Any previous or past or present pest infestation, wood destroying insects, any issues with draining, grading, any mechanical issues, mechanical changes, anything about local zoning, changes with restrictive covenants, building codes, hazardous or toxic materials. Is there asbestos in the home? Do we know of high radon levels? And we go on and on. Any outside commercial industrial source that could provide noise, odor, smoke, easement, shared driveways, party walls. Is the seller facing foreclosure or bankruptcy? Is it in a flood zone? Is property private or public street? If it is, any owners association maintenance with the public street or the private street. So you go through 31 items, quite detailed. Yes, quite detailed. Go through 31 items, and then the seller's instructed, if you answered yes to any of these, please explain. So if you said, yes, this is broke, tell us more. And if these 2 lines aren't enough, then they can attach an additional piece of paper. The rest of this is if the property is in an HOA. So if the property is in an owner's association, the seller is going to want to disclose that. And again, I'll kind of let you look at this, but this kind of tells the buyer what their HOA dues may cover if the seller knows. If it's not an HOA, you don't need to worry about this last page and a half. A lot of times, if it's not in an HOA, I actually see a big slash through it, right? So we all know that it's not in an HOA. Same thing on page 4, we just put a big X. So the seller goes through, hopefully, before we list the property, the seller goes through and completes it. They sign it. Then we load it in MLS, activate the listing. And when a buyer is ready to make the offer, the buyer's agent can pull the form, review it with their buyer, and then have their buyer sign it and present it with the offer. Comments on the Rpods? The other one we have is the MOG. Once upon a time ago, the MOG was a line in the Rpods. But then there was a lawsuit. I always heard, I don't know if this is true or not, but I always heard there was a lawsuit in Texas. There was a builder that bought a whole bunch of land, subdivided it, and sold the lots, right? Before they sold the lots, they severed the rights to oil. This is Texas we're talking about, lots of oil, right? So they severed the rights to the oil, but they didn't disclose that they severed those rights. So people started buying lots and building. Fast forward in time, one homeowner's out in his backyard digging, and he struck oil. And he said, sweet. And the builder said, actually, that's mine. I severed those rights. That's my oil. So this big lawsuit, and now we have a form. That was the result of it for us. It went from a single line in the residential property disclosure to now we have our own form. We just got this form in like 2015. So if you think about it, this form is not that old. It's not been around that long. Same thing, instruction to property owners. They have to answer honestly. It's part of the Residential Property Disclosure Act. Here's the mineral and oil and gas rights disclosure. They can be severed from the title to the property. If they have been severed, the owner may have perpetual right to drill, mine, explore, and remove any of these subsurface items from the property or from a nearby location. With regard to the severance, seller makes the following disclosure. And I think the best way to see this form is to cut it in half. So the first part of it is talking about minerals. Mineral rights were severed from the property by a previous owner. The seller can say yes, no, or no representation. They may or may not know. Seller has severed the mineral rights or seller intends to sever the mineral rights. They cannot say no representation. They have to answer yes or no. Yes or no, I have severed or I intend to sever. And then we go through that same little exercise again with oil and gas. Oil and gas rights were severed from the previous owner. Yes, no, no rep. Or seller has severed or intends to sever. Yes or no only. Note to purchaser, if the owner does not give you this statement by the time you make an offer, you may, under certain conditions, have the right to cancel this contract at no penalty to you. To cancel this contract, written notice, 3 calendar days following receipt or contract formation, whichever occurs first. This one is still 1 page. We don't have many 1-page forms left. This is one of the few. So just still a 1 page. We're 1 form's change away from it becoming a 2-page form. Again, the owner signs it. We list the property, put it in MLS as an attachment. And then the buyer wants to sign it, acknowledging receipt when you present the offer on their behalf. So make sure you're grabbing these from MLS and having your buyers sign them. If they're not in MLS, call the listing agent. I'm writing an offer. Where are the forms? Questions on our Rpods or our MOG? The Real Estate Commission recommends that we have the seller complete these forms prior to coming up with a purchase price. So, or an asking price, excuse me, not a purchase price, an asking price. So we can address any issues. You know, if a new roof has more value than a roof that's 30 years old. Yes. So, I mean, a new roof is like driving a new car off the lot. You're going to have more value, but you're not going to get 100% of return. A new roof has a lot more value than one that's 30 years old. So that may affect the asking price. If the roof is 30 years old, the buyer needs to take into consideration, I'm probably going to have to fork out $10,000 in the near future for a new roof. So that's what we mean by this. Listing agents, the recommendation is that we try to get the seller to complete this before we start recommending the asking price, the listing price. So what if you're dealing with that nasty seller and the seller says, whatever you do, don't you tell anybody that the roof leaks. Don't you share material facts. What if what if the 30-year-old could affect the listing price? But the seller refuses to budge. No, I want X amount. I don't care that the roof is 30 years old and this buyer's going to have to replace it. Guys, please understand, we don't have to accept every listing. You have got to stop and ask yourself, is it worth your time? Is it worth your energy? Is it worth your marketing dollars? And if the seller is demanding you keep these material facts to yourself. I mean, you have choices. If you comply with the seller, you possibly face license law and commission rule violations. Is it worth having your license disciplined? I mean, I can't answer that for you, but you need to understand the consequences of your action. What if the seller says, I don't care that everything in the house is 50 years old. I still want top dollar. You know, if you guys can't come to agreement on an asking price, you may have to refuse the listing. You may have to walk away. Has anybody walked away from a listing yet? I say yet because it probably will happen. I walked away from one. We talked about value. I gave the sellers my probable sales price. We were about, I told, I mean, this is a $95,000, $100,000 home. They thought they were going to get 130, 135. We were way off. And I said, okay, so we're not done yet, right? So where are you getting 130? Where are you getting 135? Obviously, this was a different market. But about that time, he produced a piece of paper to me that had the list to the dollar of all the work they had done to the house. So they were taking the actual market value and adding on. And that's where they got the 130 stuck in their mind. And again, you know, it did add value. I went back and looked at the comps again. I talked to my team leader. You know, sometimes two sets of eyes are better than one. I said, all right. I said, maybe 105, maybe 110, but I still can't promise I can get you 130. I just didn't see it. They held out. They said, thank you very much for your time, but we want 130, 135. I said, best of luck to you guys. I did not feel in my heart of hearts that I could do that for them. If I lose a listing for any reason, I will stalk that listing. I want to know who lists it and for how much. I stalked that listing for a couple of months. Actually, it never became a listing. Nobody ever listed it. I don't know if it went for sale by owner or not, but I have a feeling they ran into similar conversations with other agents. Nobody felt that they could get them that 135 because their rationale for putting value on it isn't how we do it. So you have to ask yourself if the listing is worth it. Is it worth you working with this seller? Again, I can't answer that for you. Questions or comments? Okay. All right, last break before lunch. When we come back, we're going to talk about lead-based paint for seller disclosure. So let's take 10 minutes and we'll come back and talk about some lead. I don't know what I'm gonna do for lunch today, but I'm pretty sure it's gonna be outside. It is so nice out there.
I know, I'm about to take this computer outside.
Jealous. We live, so right across the street from us is a strip of land, and then on the other side of that is Highway 85. And the noise isn't too bad, but when you get outside, especially in the front yard, so like yesterday, we had all the windows in the house open except for mine here, because I knew as soon as I opened that window, that highway noise would come in. So I had to keep it out. But even out back, it can get, but you know, it's kind of like white noise, you know, because when we first looked at this house, we thought it's either going to bother us or it's not. You know, we got out of the car. I'm like, if you really think about it, it could pretend to be the ocean, you know, so it's nice white noise to have, especially when we're trying to get to sleep. All right. So let's talk about the residential lead-based paint disclosures. We have various disclosures for lead-based paint required for a buyer or a lessor is obligated to purchase or rent any target housing. Target housing is any home built prior to what year?
78.
Mouths go. The
70
magic year when it comes to lead-based paint, that's right, is 1978. So if the home was built prior to 1978, whether it's for lease or for sale, the buyer or tenant, possible buyer or tenant, has a right to know that they deserves to know that they have the right to have the home tested for lead. Typically, the most common place that we see lead is going to be in paint. So think about paint for doorways, door frames, window sills. You may also have lead pipes or lead solder. Solder is what connects pipes and stuff, right? So there might be lead in those as well. Again, I think typically where we see it is in paint. When it comes to this, you guys, our job is to help educate the public. Don't look at a buyer and say, oh, it's built prior to 1978. It might have lead. Don't buy this house, right? Don't scare them. Help educate them. And absolutely the best thing that we can do to educate the buyer or the tenant is to provide them with EPA's booklet, Protect Your Family from Lead in Your Home. You can go to EPA's website and get this. If you're affiliated with a firm, you may have access to it via your .loop, zip forms, SkySlope, whatever. You can get the nice fancy booklet, or if you're frugal like me, you can get a flat PDF that you can send it to them for free. Again, how you give them the information doesn't matter, but they have a right to know about the possible dangers of lead in the home that may affect the family. Lead is most dangerous to children and to women bearing children, pregnant women. Lead mostly affects those developing bodies. So all those developing bodies, organs, that's where the dangers for lead is. Lead is one of the few rules, the only one I can think of off the top of my head, that caveat emptor doesn't apply. Caveat emptor does not apply with lead. The seller must disclose any known presence of lead. Please note, once again, I ask you guys, can the seller disclose what they don't know? No, they can only disclose what they know. So if the sellers are do-it-yourselfers and paint themselves, they may not know. They may not know that they could have had it tested. If the seller hires contractors to paint, the contractors are obligated to send it off for testing. If there is lead, the seller has been provided with records or reports from those test results, and the seller is required to disclose it. This is another one of these things that we need to have as an attachment in MLS. We'll look at this form in just a second. It's a dual form. It's a seller disclosure and buyer acknowledgement. So there's two pieces involved to it. So the seller starts when we list the property by giving their disclosure. Either they know or they don't. And if they do know, they've provided reports and records. We need to have this to the buyer before they present the offer. If it's a tenant situation, if the disclosure was provided initially at the beginning of the lease, the landlord doesn't have to provide it again. So at the beginning of the lease, and then if the tenant renews the next year and the next year, we don't have to keep providing it every year, unless it wasn't disclosed at the beginning of the lease. If the disclosures weren't given initially. Tenants may not have the right to have it tested because it's not their home, but they still have the right to know about the possible dangers of lead in the home. So we're still going to provide them with the booklet for them to make that decision if they want to rent this home or not. Again, prepare your sellers. If they want to have it tested, or if the buyer wants to have it tested during their due diligence, guys, how do they do it? They have to chip up some of that paint and send it to the lab to have it tested. So when they show up, usually your home inspector may be able to help with this. But when they show up with their scraper and start chipping off paint off the windowsill, prepare your sellers for that. Hopefully they're doing it underneath where we can't see it, not on top, but that's the only way to have it tested, is to have a sample sent in. Again, our responsibility, we need to make sure that this form gets complete and that delivery gets to the buyer. So we're making sure that the seller completes it to the best of their knowledge. And then we're assisting in delivery. Again, it's twofold. We'll see in a second. Seller acknowledgement. I'm sorry, seller disclosure, buyer acknowledgement. Seller disclosure, buyer acknowledgement. The Lead-Based Paint Act applies to target housing. Target housing is defined as most residential housing built prior to 1978. It's the magic year. We've got a couple exceptions. We'll see those in just a second. This does include multifamily housing, so that big, large apartment complex, for example. It also does include subleases. So if you're subletting your apartment, if you're letting somebody else take your lease, any known presence has to be disclosed. The exceptions, this says most residential housing, so there are a few exceptions that don't qualify under this target housing. Housing intended for elderly persons or persons with disabilities. In other words, no children live there. Number, lead mostly affects children. The other exception is 0-bedroom dwellings. What we mean by that are like dorm rooms, military barracks, studio apartments. Those are 0-bedroom dwellings.
Would daycare fall into that category?
No, because there's kids there. So, but it's residential. So if the daycare is in the home, right? But if it's just a standalone daycare, that's a great point, but it's just residential. So I guess that depends, John. Is the daycare in your living room or is it its own separate building?
Yeah, I was kind of referring to 0-bedroom dwellings like in a commercial setting.
Yeah. Yeah, so that's the residential housing. Yep, is what we're looking for here. You would think daycare would be the exception to the residential, right? I mean, because kids hang out there all the time, but Foreclosures are typically exempt from completing the disclosure or bank-owned property. Any home that's been certified as lead-based paint-free, if it's been tested and it comes back and the seller receives a clean bill of health. Short-term leases are exempt, so anything less than 100 days. And again, renewals are exempt as long as it was disclosed at the beginning of the lease. Once it's disclosed at the beginning of the lease, every time you renew it, you don't have to disclose it. It's already been done. Our responsibility under license law and federal rules. We have various responsibility and they define specifically who the agent is. So first off, under federal rules, the agent is defined as the broker in the transaction that's paid by the property owner or through a brokerage agreement with the listing agent. So the agent, if the seller's paying the listing firm sharing their commission, then the buyer's getting their commission from the listing firm, right? The buyer's getting paid via the listing agreement. So typically most brokers, listing agent, buyer's agents are going to have to follow these rules. The only exemption is going to be a buyer agent that's paid by the buyer. So we may not have to follow if you're not paid by the seller through a listing agreement. I say when in doubt, disclose. That's just Julie talking though. So now that we know who the agent is defined, and again, most of us in most cases, this one exception. When it comes to our responsibilities, we have to inform the seller or the lessor, the landlord, of their obligations to complete the form. If they know, they have to disclose. Caveat emptor does not apply. And we have to make sure everybody follows the rules. I think it's so important to mention again, the seller can't disclose what they don't know. So if they've never had it tested, if they're do-it-yourselfers, they have nothing to disclose.
Julie, the slide before, you had an exemption on there. What was that?
Buyer
Okay.
agent paid by the buyer. Because we're not through a listing agreement, right? So think about like a for sale by owner possibly.
Okay.
And the FSBO won't pay. As with the Rpods and the MOG, as long as we do our part to ensure everybody's in compliance, we're not going to be found guilty of improper disclosure. I can't make anybody do anything. All I can do is encourage them, discuss the law, beg them, plead them, and document all my attempts. That's the key to this, you guys. Document your attempts. Bottom line, if they refuse to do it, I can't do it. Like, well, I'll do it for you. No, we cannot complete this for them. Gee, Julie, what's the big deal? Well, we could be looking at penalties. There's a warning for the first time on intentional offenders. By the way, this is for owners and their agents. So sellers, lessors, and their agents. An injunction is a legal stop. The court could put an injunction on you to basically not work until they get this resolved. If the owner is an investor, they could put an injunction on the owner until we get this resolved. Could be looking up to fines up to $10,000 per violation. Civil penalties. You could be sued for actual damages. You could have to reimburse the client for actual damages. You could face criminal prosecution. Max is 1 year in jail, up to $10,000 fine. And oh yes, don't not think that the real estate commission isn't going to weigh in on this as well. This is why you have your documentation. If you have to stand in front of the commissioners, if you have to stand in front of the judge, you do so with your documentation. So to help everybody with compliance, we have the North Carolina Lead-Based Paint Hazard Management Program. This has been around since 2010. What this says is inspectors, firms, and individuals who perform renovations, repairs, and painting projects for compensation, whenever their project disturbs lead-based paint in the home, it's occupied by a child, there are certain rules that they have to follow. These rules are on the next slide. I think the key here is anybody that's paid to do the job. Again, do-it-yourselfers are exempt. Once the seller hires somebody to do the job, they have to abide by this hazard management program, lead-based paint hazard management program. These individuals that fall under this category must take required training. They must be certified in finding, detecting, treating, handling lead-based paint. They have to follow specific work practices. And they need to provide the owner with the Lead Safe Certified Guide to Renovation Right pamphlet. So your contractors, your people that paint for a living for compensation have taken, hopefully have taken these extra steps. Again, this is how a seller knows.
What page is that on, Julie? My computer went out for a minute.
It's not, I'm sorry. It's in, it comes from general update material from the pickup course. So I'm sorry, I went off book for the hazard management program. Yep.
So basically it just applies to like contractors or when you're renovating, that kind of stuff.
Inspectors, firms, and individuals performing renovations, repairs, and painting for compensation that disturb lead in the home built prior to 1978. Slapping a new coat of paint over it doesn't make lead go away. Fines for these individuals that are certified, that are contracted, failure to do the required must. North Carolina state, they're looking up to $75 per day that they're in violation. EPA could pop them for $32,500 per day. As we said, do-it-yourselfers, owner-occupied do-it-yourselfers are exempt from the certification requirement, but they are encouraged to. They are allowed to follow these lead-safe work practices. They can also get their hands on the lead-based paint, the EPA's pamphlet. Quick Google search can answer lots of questions for them. They're not required, but it can't hurt. Where are my HGTV fans? Come on, I know you're out there. Yeah, I tell you guys to turn that stuff off the first day of pre-licensing, but you guys remember Chip and Joanna? You remember your friends Chip and Joanna? They got themselves in trouble for not properly handling a renovation project that had lead in it. So see, even reality stars aren't exempt from from these disclosures. That was that's been a while now. You guys remember that? That's been a few, I don't remember how many years. This is another one of these things that need to be addressed. We need to have the seller complete and acknowledge when we're still formulating a listing price. Again, if there's work that needs to be done, we need to suggest that we take that into consideration. So just like the Rpods, we do a whole lot of work before we ever list that property. And while doing your CMAs, we're going to talk about CMAs after lunch. Doing your CMAs are important. It doesn't give you the whole picture of the house. Remember, you can only do so much until you walk in the front door, right? Once you walk in the front door, it may change everything. So please, if you do a CMA, you have an idea of what you think you could sell it for, but you don't know for sure until you walk in that front door. Everything changes. So the suggestion is that we hash all this stuff out before we suggest a price. And guys, remember, we'll see, we cannot sign our listing agreement until we decide on a price. So we may be doing some work before we get that listing agreement signed. So let's go back to Learn, Test, Pass. And let's find all right, hold up. I got a plan B, never fear. We will look at this form today, and I will put it in Learn, Test, Pass for you. Yeah.
Is it the exclusive right to sell listing?
Mm-mm.
You're like, oh.
No. I am looking for, I'll put it in Learn, Test, Pass over lunch so you guys have it. Can you guys see my screen? Can you guys see? Okay. So this is our lead-based paint or lead-based paint hazard addendum. First off, who can remind me what an addendum is? What does an addendum do?
Add something.
It adds something. So when you see the word addendum, see the word add. Specifically, we're going to add this to our offer of purchase and contract. So the seller does their part. And it even tells us this addendum is attached to and made part of the offer to purchase and contract. During the
We're
due
seeing your
diligence,
PowerPoint, Julie. Is that what you want us to see?
you don't see the form?
No.
Okay. So let's try that again. I think I did something.
Very
How
good.
about now?
Yes.
Do we see a form? Thank you. I could see it. All right, so the lead-based paint, again, it's an addendum. It's attached to and made part of the offer to purchase and contract. During the due diligence period, the buyer shall have the right to obtain a risk assessment or inspection of the property for the presence of lead in the home at the buyer's expense. Buyer may waive the right to obtain a risk assessment or inspection. That's up to them during their due diligence. Big bold. Intact lead-based paint that is in good condition is not necessarily a hazard. The buyer's encouraged to see that pamphlet from the EPA, Protect Your Family from Lead in Your Home. And then we have a disclosure, a lead warning. Every buyer of any interest in residential real property on which the dwelling was built prior to 1978 is notified that the property may present exposure to lead from young that can place young children at risk of developing lead poisoning. This form does not say this home was built prior to 1978, so it has lead. This form says because of the year that it was built, it may have lead. You guys see that? That word may means a whole lot. Lead poisoning in young children can produce permanent neurological damage, including disabilities, behavior problems, impaired memory. Could also pose a risk to pregnant women. Seller of any interest in property is required to provide the buyer with any information from risk assessments or inspections that the seller has in their possession. A risk assessment or inspection for possible lead is recommended prior to purchase. Obviously, this is the for sale version. Just so you know, there's a for rent version out there too that addresses the lessor and the lessee, the landlord and the tenant. So if you're going into property management, you got your own forms. Then, as we mentioned, this form is twofold. So it starts with the seller disclosure. We complete this before we list it. This is another attachment that we put in MLS. So all buyers with an interest can view this so they can see this. And the seller has to disclose the presence of lead-based paint. They either know of any presence or they have no knowledge. So they check one or the other. And then there are records and reports available to the seller. Either seller has provided the buyer with available records or the seller has no records to provide. So these are the seller disclosures. Prior to going under contract, the buyer receives this and the buyer has to make some acknowledgements. The buyer acknowledges receipt of the seller's statement above and records and reports, if any. The buyer acknowledges receipt of the pamphlet, Protect Your Family from Lead in Your Home. Guys, don't have your buyers initial this if you don't provide them with the pamphlet, right? Make sure you provide them with the pamphlet and have them acknowledge the receipt. And then the buyer has the opportunity, accepts or waives the opportunity to conduct their risk assessment during due diligence. That should be rolled into their due diligence period. They either accept or waive that opportunity. Agent's acknowledgement. Agent has informed the seller of the seller's obligations under this and is aware of his or her responsibility to ensure compliance. It doesn't specify it, but if the agent has informed the seller, we're probably talking about the listing agent, right? So the listing agent would want to acknowledge, what if you're a buyer's agent working with a FSBO though? That might be one exception. So the agent has informed the seller of their obligations, their duty to disclose, the fact that caveat emptor doesn't apply here. And then we got to place buyer signs on the left, seller signs on the right. And this is one of few forms that you and I get to sign. So the selling agent and the listing agent sign. Again, we're acknowledging that we told the parties about their rights and their obligations under this act. Lead-based paint, questions on that? Anybody dealt with this yet? Have you? Have you guys? What you got? I'm curious. Did the seller know? So you didn't, okay, I'm sorry. So you haven't dealt with the seller knowing of any disclosure.
No.
Okay, I apologize. Gotcha. So we've dealt with the form, but the seller hasn't had knowledge. Okay. All right. Yep. Again, you guys, our duty, our responsibility, disclose what we know. And in this case, we've got to encourage the seller to disclose as well. Okay, questions on this one? And I got me a note to put it in our test pass so you can have access to it. So we're back in unit 9 or chapter 9 now again. So we're back to working with sellers. I had to go back into unit 8 and pull some other material to make sure from the CE classes to make sure we got you the syllabus required information. So in still working with sellers, another thing that's important when working with sellers is verifying the acreage or the size of the lot. Please, let's first talk about what we're not expected to do. I'm not expected to go out there and measure the lot, not unless you're a surveyor. You guys surveyors, we shouldn't be out there measuring the lot. If the seller had a survey, we can ask to see that. That can help us determine the square footage and the acreage of the lot. Be so very cautious about going to tax records. GIS, sometimes those things aren't right. Be so very cautious. Try at MLS input. We're required to put in acres or lot dimensions. I have to have one or the other. Again, I'm not sure how other MLSs work, but we are required to have one or the other. If it's in a subdivision, you can get your hands on the plat map. You can use that information. If a survey is available, you have that information there.
In MLS, is that supposed to be like in a meets and bounds format? Because I've seen some, it's just, A by B by C by D, and it's not like no direction or whatever.
And I think to that point, because I know what you're talking about, not all lots are perfect squares and rectangles, right? So you may have a lot that does, maybe okay, like here's the road, and then it comes out here, and then it comes over here, and then it comes over here, and then down here, right? I mean, some lots are so that might be what you're seeing, John, is, this by this by this by this, right? So
yeah, they just don't give any direction or anything. It's just
right.
yeah.
So they're just given the dimensions. So the survey would give you the dimensions and the directions. So again, if your seller has a survey available, again, please hear me, you guys. Even if the seller says, yeah, here's my survey, and I don't care if a buyer sees it, I would always encourage my buyer to have their own survey done. I don't know many sellers that have ever said that over the years. Usually the seller thinks, well, I had to pay for my own. Why wouldn't a buyer have to pay for theirs as well? But at least us as the listing agent can ask to see it so we can review it and look at it and help identify some of those property lines. Is it a real rectangle or square rectangle, or is it a funky shaped lot?
Julia, I need a bit of clarification. You said something about the tax records or GIS don't count on those. So how do we verify acreage?
Surveys, plat maps. Those should be our go-to. Tax records. I mean, again, just be cautious. Just be cautious. If you don't have a survey, if you don't have a plat map, the GIS or the tax records may be all you got, right? But I would try to find other places first.
Okay, so what's our liability if we do go to tax and it's not accurate?
Document. Seller doesn't have a survey to provide. Plat map isn't available. This was my option.
Okay.
The transaction I'm working on right now, Julie, the survey, they're having a survey done, and the sellers are actually going to give me the survey. So I thought that was pretty nice.
That's nice. The seller's having a survey done before you?
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah. I don't know why, but
I
yeah.
was gonna say, it makes me rethink some things I thought about sellers in the past. Are you working with the buyer or the seller, Donna?
I'm working with the buyer.
Okay. Well, that's really interesting.
Yeah.
That's really, really kind. So,
So,
and the reason we always encourage buyers to have their own done, I mean, we don't know how long ago the seller had theirs, right? And if we're using meets and bounds, they rely on monuments. Do monuments move over time? So if they're telling you start at the point of beginning and go to this tree and then that rock and then that lake, can all that change over time? Even if you have a stake in the ground, those can get moved, right? That's why we encourage the buyer to have a current survey done, because it might be if we relied on this rock before, this rock might have moved, or that tree might have fallen down, or that lake might have dried up, right? So always encourage your buyer, even if the seller provides. I cannot believe the seller's paying for this.
they're paying for it.
Wow.
But I think the house is a 1964 house, and the seller is the POA of the mother who had to go to a nursing home. So I
Okay.
guess they want to make sure they're covered, which,
That
you
could-
know,
yeah.
hey, I'm like, but
Hey,
you know,
yeah, I mean, you say, wow, thank you, but
yeah. I even reached out to the attorney, the closing attorney, and asked him, you know, is that going to be sufficient for title insurance? Because he said, you need to have a survey. Your buyers
Yeah.
need to have a survey.
yeah. Very interesting. So we're not expected to measure, not our job. We do need to know how to convert acres to square feet. Who remembers what that magic number is? How many square feet are in 1 acre?
43,560.
43,560. Have you guys seen the meme out there yet? The number one thing you learn from real estate school is what? There are 43,560 square feet in 1 acre. So, as John said, if you get your hands on the plat map, you might be able to see the lot dimensions. If it's a square or a rectangle, it's easy to figure out, right? If it's turn, it's going to be a lot harder for us to figure out because we're not the surveyors, we're not the experts. I tell you guys, if you have those lot dimensions or if you have the square feet, if you really want to impress a buyer, when that buyer says, I wonder how many acres are in this tract of land, if you're able, whip out your calculator and give them a true number. That's really going to impress your buyers. But just make sure you're accurate and you're true before you start disclosing that. Those of you that know me know that I'm a fan of the T-bar. Those of you that are just meeting me, I'm telling you, I'm a fan of the T-bar. And when we're converting square feet to acres, I'm going to give you a quick T-bar 101 here. When we're converting square feet to acres, I like using the T-bar because it's easier for me to remember. When you're studying the T-bar, do you guys see this back fourth line right here? This line right here. This line means divide. And the up down line means multiply. We're going to look at a couple examples together in just a second. We know our magic number of 43,560. So if your buyer's asking you, I see how many square feet are here, but how many acres is that? You take the number of square feet, you divide it by 43,560, and you can tell them how many acres it is. If for some reason you know how many acres it is, and they ask you how many square feet, you can take that number of acres and times it by 43,560 to get your square feet. Again, we're going to look at a couple samples. This isn't testable material, but I do think it's important for day to day because these are questions that we see. Y'all, I use this number every single day. Every listing I put in, everything I do for our developers, our builders, I use this number every single day. So we'll look at a couple examples again in just a second. 43,560. And we can kind of deduce a little bit too, right? 1 acre is 43,560 square feet. So if you have less than 43,560 square feet, it's less than an acre. You with me? Because every single acre is equal to 43,560. If it's more than that, then you know you have more than an acre. So you can, if nothing else, use that number as kind of a gauge. Is it more than or less than an acre? Again, we'll look at that math in just a second. So we should be able to convert acreage to square feet. We should attempt to verify the acreage, try to get the survey from the seller. I understand not all sellers have a survey, but if they do, ask them to provide. You don't have to share that. I think that's where sellers get nervous. They think you're going to share it with a buyer. So reassure them this isn't for the buyer. The buyer's going to have their own. This is to help me. This is to help me help them, right? So have this conversation. And part of our listing is we should be able to walk the lot with the seller and have them help. You know, we're going through the home anyway, looking at the home together. We need to be outside as well. They may know of some easements. They may know of certain points, approximations of their property lines. Never, ever, ever rely on a fence to tell you where the property line is. The only thing you know by looking at a fence is that somebody put a fence there. Is it within the property lines? Is it on the property lines? Is it an encroachment? I don't know. The only thing you know by looking at a fence is that somebody put a fence there. Those of you working with buyers, have you been with buyers yet and you talk to them about a survey and they say, Julie, I don't need a survey. You see that fence back there? That tells me my property line. No, it doesn't. No, it doesn't. It just tells you that somebody put a fence there. So don't let your buyers not have a survey because they can see the fence line. My favorite one, I had a buyer look at me once and said she didn't need a survey because she could see the mow line. How do you know they didn't hire the 14-year-old down the street to come mow the property? You think the 14-year-old down the street really knows where the property lines are? The mow line tells you less than the fence, doesn't it? So they can't rely on these things that they think that they know. That's why they hopefully have us. So let's look at just a couple examples together. One thing we will see in just a second, when I'm determining square foot, when you're talking about property, when you're looking at a lot, you're going to look at the front feet, the front foot, not width. I'm sorry. Hang on. The depth. So verbiage, let's get the proper verbiage down. When you're looking at measuring a lot, typically what you're looking at, if it's a square or a rectangle, you're looking at the front feet times the depth. This is what I mean. Let's say you have a lot and here's your road. The front feet is the part of the property that runs parallel to the road. The front feet is the part of the lot that runs along the road. The depth then is how far back from the road does the lot go. So if you're looking at a square lot, a square tract of land, you can take the front feet times the depth, and that gives you the square feet. So if you have a lot that measures 225 by 450, those are the lot dimensions. First off, we have to find the square feet, right? We're going to see this in another way, probably after, definitely after lunch, called length times width. I'm saying the same thing. Length is also known as front feet. Width is also known as depth. So if you have the lot and you know the dimensions are 225 by 450, When they give you dimensions like this, they're giving you the formula, aren't they? They're telling you that this lot is 225 by 450. So if we take our front feet of 225 by our depth of 450, I'm told that this lot has 101,250 square feet. Your buyer says, well, gee, that's nice. Thank you. But I wonder how many acres is that? How many acres are in this lot? Without picking up a calculator, can I tell my buyer it's more than or less than an acre? Do they have more than or less than 1 acre? They have more than, right? Because how many square feet in an acre?
43,560.
So now that we know the square feet, we can use our little trick. I know there's 101,250 square feet. I know my magic number of 43,560. If I take 101,250 and divide it by 43,560, I can tell my buyer that there's about 2.32 acres. That's what I mean. You can really impress them. They see this square feet. I think the consumer speaks acres. I think the consumer wants to know how many acres. So if we can determine the square feet, again, if it's one of those funky lots that we just mentioned, it's going to be a lot harder for us. And it just got out of our scope, didn't it? It just got out of our realm. But if we can easily help them determine that this is 2.32 acres, you're going to have an appreciative buyer. Again, when we get back from lunch, we'll talk about length times width. So let's say we're measuring a kitchen, for example. You got the length of the kitchen times the depth times the width of the kitchen. How many square feet are in this kitchen? So we'll see that when we get back from lunch. Questions on that? That works both ways, doesn't it? Let's say you're given the acres and your consumer wants to know for some reason how many square feet are we talking about. If it's 40 acres, it's going to be more than 43,560 square feet. It's going to be a lot more, isn't it? Because I got 40 acres to account for. So again, I think the easy way, me personally, you learn to multiply or divide, whichever's easiest for you. But for me, if I remember that 43,560 always goes here, acres goes here, what this tells me is to find the square feet, I'm going to multiply. I'm going to take 40 times my magic number of 43,560. And I'm going to learn that there's a lot of square feet. $1,742,400 square feet. There's 40 acres. So you're taking that 1 acre times 40. So yeah, I know we look at that number, we go 1 million square feet, but that's a heck of a size of a piece of land right there if it's 40 acres. So don't question yourself. Any questions on converting square feet to acres? Any questions on anything we talked about this morning? Okay. So we're at a good place. So I think we're going to pause here for lunch. When we come back, we're going to talk about inside square feet. Okay, similar concept, just different verbiage. As I mentioned yesterday when we first started, there are a couple homework assignments. The good news is we'll get to both of those this afternoon, which means you guys have all week to complete them before your exam next Sunday. So please remember, in a little over a week from this moment, you'll be taking an exam. So I'll encourage you once again to look at this stuff again this week. I know we're all busy, but that doesn't change the fact that you got a test to pass next Sunday. So we'll talk about things you can do to help yourself get ready for that. And then it'll give you time too to do the required homework assignments. So we'll talk about that this weekend. Fair enough? Fair enough. All right, so I got 12:53. Let's take lunch. Well, I'm going to log back on. We're going to start back up at 1:55. So 1:55. I'll log on about 1:50. So if you want to come on a few minutes early, please make note of that time, 1:55, so we can get started right on time and cover what we need to this afternoon to prepare you for next weekend. So enjoy your lunch. Go outside. It is so nice. Go outside, enjoy your lunch, and I will see you guys at 1:55.